If only we could see the endless strings of consequences that result from our smallest actions. But we can't know better until knowing better is useless. Hey, my name is Kaylee. Thank you for clicking on the video. This is Read, Rant, Review, where, you guessed it, I read books and I do rant reviews. Today we're talking about a book that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and this is a bonus rant review. Traditionally on this channel, I do once a week rant reviews every Friday of some crazy book that y'all vote for, and I put up a poll every Friday and Saturday that determines what we read next. However, I would like to talk about Looking for Alaska by John Green. This was such an influential book as I was growing up. This book was published in 2005, I believe March of 2005. So this is actually about to hit its 20-year anniversary, which is insane to think about. Of note, this book was also John Green's first book. So you might have heard of him from The Fault in Our Stars, An Abundance of Catherines, Paper Towns. This book is currently sitting on Goodreads at a 3.96 with 1.66 million ratings. If you are completely unfamiliar with what this book is, I will just read you the back of it. But it is a young adult novel that has faced a lot of controversy. Interestingly, it's split into two parts. There's a before and there's an after. And each of the chapters is titled after how many days before or after whatever this event is. So on the back, before, Miles Pudge Halter is done with his safe life at home. His whole existence has been one big non-event, and his obsession with famous last words has only made him crave the great perhaps. Francois Rabelais, poet, is who is credited to saying that, even more. He heads off to the sometimes crazy, possibly unstable, and anything but boring world of Culver Creek boarding school, and his life becomes the opposite of safe. Because down the hall is Alaska Young, the gorgeous, clever, funny, sexy, self-destructive, screwed up, and utterly fascinating Alaska Young, who is an event unto herself. She pulls Pudge into her world, launches him into the great perhaps, and steals his heart. After, nothing is ever the same. A few things I wanted to touch on or make some commentary on before we get into the book, we will also discuss at the end. So we're going to kind of preface some stuff, we'll visit it in the middle, and then we'll do some final commentary at the end. First off, the other reason that I wanted to talk about this book is because it was rated by the American Library Association. This book was the fourth most challenged book in the 2010 to 2019 timeframe. And it was challenged because it includes drugs, alcohol, smoking, nudity, offensive language, and it is also sexually explicit. So we'll go through it, kind of see what they're talking about and why they're saying that. In addition to the book bannings, some of the other things and the pushback that I have seen on this book, particularly on Goodreads. Like I said, I hold this book near and dear to my heart, right? This is a 5-star to me. This was like a life-changing thing for me. Even going back and rereading it now, I can see the critiques. Like I see the point of view where people are coming from, but I think it is still such a great book and has a great message to it in a way that we'll unpack later, that I feel like it's unfair to give it a 1-star. If you have watched any of my other rant reviews on this channel, I read all sorts of stuff and I do commentary on it, and we'll do deep dives, right? Chapter by chapter, beat by beat breakdown of the book. I highlight the good parts, I highlight the bad parts, and I just tell you the story, right? We're on like FaceTime, you know what I mean? Like we're just catching up. I'm just telling you the book. In light of that, I knew that I was going into this with like a little bit of like a bias to it, right? A favoritism toward this book. So I go on Goodreads and I'm reading through the 1-star reviews, and all of it is like, oh, Alaska Young, the female character, people's argument is that she's over-sexualized, that she's a manic pixie dream girl, and that she is unrealistic to a point, right? That this engagement with her is unrealistic, and really just going into the manic pixie dream girl trope. I found this wonderful article from the Dakota Planet. It was published on January 21st of 2021. I'll have it linked in the description box below. But Sam Pribe, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your last name, wrote this article. And it says, we need to talk about Manic Pixie Dream Girls, an evaluation of Alaska Young. So I'm going to read you the first opening of that article. I'll read you the rest of it at the end. And we will talk about why I heavily disagree Like, she is the complete opposite of a manic pixie dream girl. I'm going to go into this book and act like you have never heard this story, just in case you haven't. We're going to do it chapter by chapter. We're going to go through this book together. I won't get ahead of myself, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'm trying to leave this as vague as I can in the beginning to like contextualize and give you some food for thought if you have read it, or things to consider as we go through it. And then we'll do a full unpacking later on or as we go. I will not spoil it for you if you're watching this video. We will go through this together. I hope that makes sense. The Dakota Planet article. In 2005, film critic Nathan Rabin first used the term Manic Pixie Dream Girl to describe Kristen Dunst's character in the movie Elizabethtown. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl, or MPDG for short, is a character stereotype in which an otherworldly, beautifully shallow female character's sole purpose in a piece of media is to guide the male protagonist through life and help him reach his goals and reevaluate life for what it truly is. There's many examples of it in the media. Natalie Portman's character in Garden State, Zooey Deschanel in 500 Days of Summer, Mary Elizabeth Winstead in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. You get the gist. It's a popular trope, one that's easy to latch onto if you're a lazy writer and need some female representation in your otherwise male-dominated story. I define this trope as a way to transition into what I really want to talk about, Alaska Young. So we will revisit that. Yeah, I don't think there's really anything else that I want to note, so I think we will just dive right into it. Our book opens 136 days before. We open with Miles Halter, a 16-year-old boy who is getting ready to move from Florida to Alabama to go to a boarding school. His life back home is pretty boring and he doesn't have many friends, and he hopes that this boarding school will help him find the great perhaps. The kids in this book, they all have like a thing. Miles is knowing the last words of famous people who died. And then everybody kind of has a thing that we'll get to as we go. But it's cute. I like that aspect of it. So with Miles, knowing famous people last words, his favorite last word is from the poet Francois Rabelais, whose last words were, "I go seeking a great perhaps." In chapter 2, 128 days before, Miles and his parents go to Culver Creek boarding school in Alabama, and they're helping him unpack. They leave and he takes a shower, and when he gets out, he meets his roommate, Chip. Chip's talent is memorizing the names and countries of capital cities. He also gives Miles the lowdown. There are types of students there at the boarding school. There are the regular boarders who are there the entirety of the semester, and then there are the weekday warriors, who are the rich kids who go home on the weekends. We also learn that Chip goes by the nickname Colonel, and he gives Miles the nickname Pudge. And then there's Eagle, who is the dean of the school. He's, got eagle eyes. I'll put a little chart probably over here. It has all the names and nicknames associated, because there is quite a few characters in the book, so we can all keep up with what's going on. We're also first introduced to Alaska Young. So after he gets settled, Chip, the Colonel, takes him for a tour around the boarding school and to meet his other friends. And they go to Alaska's room to go and get some cigarettes to smoke and BS and hang out. It's the first day back in the semester. They have the whole weekend to hang out and get their stuff together before classes start on Mondays. So they go into Alaska's room, and this is how we're introduced to Alaska, which I think is the first bit that rubs people the wrong way. I'll read it to you so you get the full experience, okay? We walked in. I turned to close the door behind me, and the Colonel shook his head and said, "After 7, you have to leave the door open if you're in a girl's room." But I barely heard him because the hottest girl in all of human history was standing before me in cut-off jeans and a peach tank top. And she was talking over the Colonel, talking loud and talking fast. So, first day of summer, I'm in the Grand Old Vine Station with this boy named Justin, and we're at his house watching TV on the couch, and mind you, I'm already dating Jake. Actually, I'm still dating him, miraculously enough, but Justin is a friend of mine from when I was a kid, so we're watching TV and literally chatting about the SATs or something, and Justin puts his arm around me, and I think, oh, that's nice, we've been friends for a long time, and this is totally comfortable, and we're just chilling, and then I'm in the middle of a sentence about analogies or something, and like a hawk, he reaches down and he honks my boob. Honk. A much too firm 2 to 3 second honk. And the first thing I thought of was, okay, how do I extricate this claw from my boob before it leaves permanent marks? And the second thing I thought was, God, I can't wait to tell Takumi and the Colonel. They laugh about it. I stared, stunned partly by the force of the voice emanating from this petite but, God, curvy girl, and partly by the gigantic stacks of books that lined her walls. She then pantses Pudge, or Miles, and then they buy cigarettes from her, and then the Colonel and Miles go out to the lake to go and smoke. That's how we're introduced. 16-year-olds, right, across the board. If you want to argue about like, oh, we're like over-sexualizing females or like we're over-sexualizing women. But I think there's a level of reality of how 16-year-olds are and how they talk. And how a 16-year-old boy who is at this brand new school trying to look for a new adventurous thing sees a hot girl and talks about it. I don't see what he does wrong there. I get it if you want to have the whole argument like, oh, you shouldn't talk about women like that. I'm like, we're from the point of view of a 16-year-old boy. This isn't like a grown man. He's not doing anything wrong. Whatever, we'll get there. And also, I think that is 100% like a story that I would have had with my friends growing up, which I think is the other part is like, I admit it, I'm so completely biased about this book because of how much I see myself in Alaska and that I did when I was a kid and I read this too. Like, I read this and I painted my toenails electric blue for 3 months, dude. I could not pick this book up again until reading it now to you because it hit me so hard. And so I completely understand that I'm biased and whatever, but I don't see anything wrong with that introduction. That was one of the main ones. People were like, I got to that and I DNF'd it. Girl, okay. Anyway, so they're at the lake. They're talking about just school stuff and getting him accustomed to what's going on, more just information about the school and how it works and how the students kind of self-govern. Eventually, the colonel leaves to go and visit his girlfriend, and Alaska comes to get Miles, and they chat at the lake. And she says, do you really memorize last words? Yeah. You want to quiz me? JFK. That's obvious. Oh, is it now? No, those were his last words. Someone said, Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you. And then he said, that's obvious. And then he got shot. She laughed. God, that's awful. I shouldn't laugh, but I will. Okay, Mr. Famous Last Words boy, I have one for you. She reached into her overstuffed backpack and pulled out a book. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The General and His Labyrinth. Absolutely one of my favorite. It's about Simón Bolívar. I didn't know who Simón Bolívar was, but she didn't give me time to ask. It's a historical novel, so I don't know if it's true, but in the book, do you know what his last words are? No, you don't, but I'm going to tell you. Senor parting remarks. And then she lit a cigarette and sucked on it so hard for so long that I thought the entire thing might burn off in one drag. She exhaled and read to me. He, that's Bolivar, was shaken by the overwhelming revelation that the headlong race between his misfortunes and his dreams was at that moment reaching the finish line. The rest was darkness. Damn it, he sighed. How will I ever get out of this labyrinth? I knew great last words when I heard them, and I made a mental note to get a hold of a biography of this Bolivar fellow. Beautiful last words, but I didn't quite understand. So what's the labyrinth? I asked her. And then he goes on to say, and now is a good time as any to say that she was beautiful. In the dark beside me, she smelled of sweat and sunshine and vanilla, and on that thin-mooned night, I could see a little more than her silhouette, except for when she smoked, when the burning cherry of the cigarette washed her face in pale red light. But even in the dark, I could see her eyes, fierce emeralds. She had the kind of eyes that predisposed you to supporting her every endeavor. And not just beautiful, but hot, too. With her breasts straining against the tight tank top, her curved legs swinging back and forth beneath the swing, flip-flops dangling from her electric blue painted toes. It was right then, between when I asked about the labyrinth and when she answered me, that I realized the importance of curves, of the 1,000 places where girls' bodies ease from one place to another, to the ankle to the calf, from calf to hip, to waist to breast, to neck, to ski slope nose, to forehead to shoulder, to the concave arch of the back to butt, etc. I'd noticed curves before, of course, but I'd never quite apprehended their significance. Her mouth close enough to me that I could feel her breath warmer than the air, she said, "That's the mystery, isn't it? Is the labyrinth living or dying? Which is he trying to escape? The world or the end of it?" Also, regarding that, hey, this is actually really, really trippy for me right now because I just finished taking my notes for the 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I also just finished reading Does It Hurt by H.D. Carlton, in which case H.D. Carlton has a line in her book that we'll get to in this that I think was a direct inspiration from Alaska Young in that character in that book. And so then to see Gabriel in this book and then some other stuff that comes later, it's actually very freaking me the heck out. Genuinely, reading this book at this exact point in time is mind-boggling. But so they continue talking into the night. She told me that I reminded her of the Colonel and when he came to Culver Creek. They're freshmen together, she said, both scholarship kids with, as she put it, a shared interest in booze and mischief. The phrase booze and mischief left me worrying that I'd stumbled into what my mother referred to as the wrong crowd, but for the wrong crowd, they both seemed awfully smart. You're smart like him, she said. Quieter, though, and cuter, but I didn't even just say that because I love my boyfriend. Yeah, you're not bad either, I said, overwhelmed by her compliment. But I didn't just say that because I love my girlfriend. Oh, wait, right, I don't have one. Yeah, don't worry, Pudge. If there's one thing I can get you, it's a girlfriend. Let's make a deal. You figure out what the labyrinth is and how to get out of it, and I'll get you laid. Deal. And we shook on it. 127 days before. The next day, Miles meets the last of the friend in the group, and that's Takumi. We also learn about Alaska's old roommate, Mariah, who was expelled last year because she was caught smoking, drinking, and lying in bed naked with her boyfriend, Paul. It's rumored that someone ratted them out, and Takumi wants to figure out who snitched. The Colonel says they deserved it because Paul was a weekday warrior, but so is the Colonel's girlfriend, so he's a little bit of a hypocrite. The Colonel goes out that night to who knows where, and Miles is excited to get a good night's sleep before his first day of school. That doesn't last long because he's kidnapped and thrown into the lake. It's a tradition for the new kids, but what is not traditional is that the weekend warriors tape his hands and feet together before throwing him in. And even just saying that out loud makes me panic. Is freaking me out. And they said it's because he's friends with the Colonel. So after a little while of flailing and freaking out, he's able to relax enough that he floats to the top and he's able to get the tape off. And they were nice enough to at least leave him a towel on the shoreline. And he is super pissed off because when the Colonel had left earlier, he made a comment about the prank. Like I said, it's tradition, so everybody knew it was coming. And so the Colonel was like, yeah, good luck, man. So he's like, WTF, dude, I literally could have died and he would have just let it happen. And he doesn't want to go back to his room because he's afraid that the weekday warriors are going to prank him again or come and get him again and throw him back in the lake. So instead he goes to Alaska's room and is freaking out about it. And she's very dismissive of it because she doesn't know any better either. She's like, dude, it happens. You have to toughen up if you're going to be here. That pisses him off as well. When he does finally go back to his room and the Colonel is there, he's like, dude, it's not funny. I literally could have died. Colonel's like, dude, you're exaggerating. Why are you being such a drama queen? Tells him what happened and the entire tone changes. He says, we will get them back. We're not rats though, so we're not going to tell the Eagle. Like I said, like I told you earlier, homie, we deal with this internally. The students govern themselves, but we will make sure that they pay for what they did. The next day, 126 days before, the Colonel wakes up to discover that the weekday warriors peed in his shoes. Revenge is definitely going to happen now, but Miles goes about his day and learns that his friends are in fact his friends. Colonel, Alaska, and Takumi are all pissed off about how far that the prank went and saying that they will avenge him, but Alaska does reiterate that he needs to be tough. The only other thing that day to note is that we are introduced to Dr. Hyde, who teaches Miles's world religions class. This class and teacher play a pretty large role throughout the book. My name is Dr. Hyde. I have a first name, of course. As far as you are concerned, it is Doctor. Your parents pay a great deal of money so that you can attend school here, and I expect that you will offer them some return on their investment by reading what I tell you to read and when I tell you to read it, and consistently attending this class. And when you are here, you will listen to what I say. This year, we'll be studying 3 religious traditions: Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism. We'll tackle 3 more traditions next year, and in my class, I will talk most of the time, and you will listen most of the time. Because you may be smart, but I've been smart longer. I'm sure some of you do not like lecture classes, but as you probably noted, I am not as young as I used to be. I would love to spend my remaining breath chatting with you about the finer points of Islamic history, but our time together is short. I must talk, and you must listen, for we are engaged here for the most important pursuit in history, for the search of meaning. What is the nature of being a person? What is the best way to go about being a person? How did we come to be, and what will become of us when we are no longer? In short, what are the rules of this game, and how might we best play it? A few days later, 122 days before, the Colonel and his girlfriend get in a fight before they are supposed to go on a date because his shirt is wrinkly, and she's like, dude, you don't even care, you're not even trying, you're about to meet my parents. The Colonel ends up getting so frustrated that he screams after Sarah storms away, leaving. And then he takes a swig from milk that he has in the fridge, but it's not milk, it's 5 parts milk and 1 part vodka. I call it ambrosia. You can barely smell the vodka in the milk, so the eagle can't catch me unless he actually takes a sip. The downside is that it tastes like sour milk and rubbing alcohol, but it's Friday night, Pudge, and my girlfriend is a bitch. Do you want some? Oh, dude, that makes me want to gag. Like, even just thinking about that makes me want to gag so freaking badly. So I imagine that they're in, like, cabin-style dormitories, right, where it's just, like, a long hallway and a couple different rooms spread throughout. Outside of the Colonel and Miles's room is a phone, and it keeps ringing. And the Colonel's like, "Are you gonna get that, dude?" Because he's all pissy. Turns out it's the Colonel's girlfriend. He goes and takes the call, ends the phone call, yelling at her, saying, "Well, screw you, too." Back in my room, he sat down with his ambrosia and told me, "She says I ratted on Paul and Mariah. That's what the Warriors are saying, that I ratted them out. Me? That's why they pissed in my shoes. That's why they nearly killed you. Because you live with me and they think I'm a rat." "How long have you been dating her?" I asked. 9 months. We never got along. I mean, I didn't even briefly like her. Like, my mom and my dad would get pissed, and then he would beat the shit out of my mom, and then my dad would be all nice, and they'd have, like, a honeymoon period. But with Sarah, there's never a honeymoon period. God, how could she think I was a rat? I know, why don't we break up? He ran a hand through his hair, clutching a fistful atop his head, and said, "I guess I stay with her because she stays with me, and that's not an easy thing to do. I'm a bad boyfriend, she's a bad girlfriend, we deserve each other." Oh, they have a little bit more back and forth, and the Colonel ends the conversation. He's like, "Not another word about it. You know what the capital of Sierra Leone is?" "No." "Me neither," he said, "but I intend to find out." And with that, he stuck his nose in the almanac, and the conversation was over. Miles is in class, and he's distracted, and the teacher kicks him out. He's upset about being embarrassed in front of the entire class, like getting called out so directly for gazing out the window and staring at the grassy hill, but he still respects Dr. Hyde and thinks that he's a genius. After class, they all join him, and they all make their way to the smoking hole, and they're just chit-chatting about who could have ratted on Mariah and Paul. Alaska changes the topic, talking about how she felt bad for Miles being kicked out of class and how adorable he is and how it's too bad that she loves her boyfriend. And then we get the most emo sentence ever. And this is the one that, this book gets clowned on so hard for this particular sentence. Alaska finished her cigarette and flicked it into the river. "Why do you smoke so damn fast?" I asked. And such a wide smile on her narrow face might have looked goofy, if not for the unimpeachable, elegant green in her eyes. She smiled with all the delight of a kid on Christmas morning and said, "Y'all smoke to enjoy it. I smoke to die." That shit hit hard on Tumblr. 109 days before, Miles and the Colonel are at a basketball game and run into the lead weekday warrior guy, and he wants to call a truce. "You got Paul and Mariah kicked out. We almost killed you. Sorry, homie. Like, let's call a truce. We'll call it even." "Why would you try and kill this guy, Kevin? He's a genius. Nuts to your truce." "Come on, dude. I know you ratted them out, and we had to defend our friend. Now it's over. Let's end it. I'll make you a deal. You pick one dead American president. If Pudge here doesn't know that guy's last words, truce. If he does, you spend the rest of your life lamenting the days that you pissed in my shoes." "That's stupid." "All right, no truce," the Colonel shot back. "Fine, Millard Fillmore," Kevin said. The Colonel looked at me hurriedly, his eyes saying, "Was that guy a president?" And I just smirked. When Fillmore was dying, he was super hungry, but his doctor was trying to starve his fever or whatever. Fillmore wouldn't shut up about wanting to eat, though, so finally the doctor gave him a tiny teaspoon of soup. And all sarcastic, Fillmore said, "The nourishment is palatable," and then died. No truce. Kevin rolled his eyes and walked away, and it occurred to me that I could have made up the last words for Millard Fillmore, and Kevin probably would have believed me if I'd used the same tone of voice. The Colonel's confidence was rubbing off on me. Right? That's cute. Once the game begins, the Colonel starts yelling a bunch of, nonsense on the sidelines, talking crap and stuff. Eventually, they do get thrown out, and Miles follows, and the Colonel says, "I've gotten thrown out of 37 straight games." Damn. Yeah, once or twice I had to go really crazy. I ran onto the court with 11 seconds left once and stole the ball from the other team. It wasn't pretty, but, I have a streak to maintain. The Colonel ran ahead of me, gleeful at his ejection, and I jogged after him, trailing in his wake. I wanted to be one of those people who have streaks to maintain, who scorch the ground with their intensity. But for now, at least I knew such people, and they needed me, just like comets need tails. That is a banger sentence, dude. You can't tell me otherwise. I'm going to read it again because that was such a good sentence. I wanted to be one of those people who have streaks to maintain, who scorch the ground with their intensity. But for now, at least I knew such people, and they needed me, just like comets need tails. 108 days before. The next day, Dr. Hyde asked me to stay after class. Standing before him, I realized for the first time how hunched his shoulders were, and he seemed suddenly sad and kind of old. "You like this class, don't you?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "You've got a lifetime to mull over the Buddhist understandings of interconnectedness." He spoke every sentence as if he had written it down, memorized it, and now reciting it. "But while you were looking out the window, you missed the chance to explore the equally interesting Buddhist belief in being present for every facet of your daily life, of truly being present. Be present in this class, and then when it is over, be present out there," he said, nodding toward the lake and beyond. "Yes, sir." 101 days before, Alaska has a van and she takes the friend group to McDonald's for a study date. She also sets Miles up with a Romanian girl named Laura. And on the drive over, there's not enough seats. And so Alaska's like, "Oh, Laura, sit on Miles's lap." And Alaska drives very, very fast and a little recklessly, going around corners and kind of whipping it a little too much to the point where he does have to hold on to Laura and be her seatbelt. Which, hey, I mean, she's kind of playing wingman, you know? She's trying to set him up here. So the kid that she's tutoring at McDonald's is like a pothead, and she's talking crap to him about smoking pot, and he's talking crap to her about smoking cigarettes. And she's like, "Well, pot makes you stupid. That's why I have to tutor you right now. I may die young, but at least I'll die smart," which I think is a funny sentence. 100 days before, Alaska and Miles are having a conversation, and he says, "Not to ask the obvious question, but why Alaska?" It always comes up eventually. "All right, so my mom was something of a hippie when I was a kid. You know, wore oversized sweaters, she knitted herself, smoked a lot of pot, etc. And my dad was a real Republican type. And so when I was born, my mom wanted to name me Harmony Springs Young, and my dad wanted to name me Mary Frances Young." As she talked, she bobbed her head back and forth to the MTV music, even though the song was the kind of manufactured pop ballad she professed to hate. "So instead of naming me Harmony or Mary, they agreed to let me decide. So when I was little, they called me Mary. I mean, they called me Sweetie or whatever, but like on school forms and stuff, they wrote Mary Young. And then on my 7th birthday, my present was I got to pick my name. Cool, huh? So I spent the whole day looking at my dad's globe for a really cool name. And then my first choice was Chad, like the country in Africa. But then my dad said that's a boy's name, so I picked Alaska. Well, later I found out what it means. It's from an Aleut word, Alieska, and it means that which the sea breaks against. And I love that. But at the time, I just saw Alaska up there, and it was big, just like I wanted to be. And it was damn far away from Vine Station, Alabama, just like I wanted to be. "And now you're all grown up and fairly far away from home," I said, smiling. "So congratulations." She stopped bobbing her head. "Getting out isn't easy," she said seriously, her eyes on mine like I knew the way out and wouldn't tell her. And then she seemed to switch conversational horses in midstream. "Like, after college, do you know what I want to do? Teach disabled kids. I'm a good teacher, right? Shit, if I can teach you pre-calc, I'm sure I can teach anybody, like maybe kids with autism." She talked softly and thoughtfully like she was telling me a secret, and I leaned in toward her, suddenly overwhelmed with the feeling that we must kiss, and we ought to kiss right now on this dusty orange couch with its cigarette burns and its decades of collected dust. And I would have. I would have kept leaning toward her until it became necessary to tilt my face so as to miss her ski-sloped nose, and I would have felt the shock of her so soft lips. I would have, but then she snapped out of it. "No," she said, and I couldn't tell at first if she was reading my kiss-obsessed mind or responding to herself out loud. She turned away from me and softly, maybe to herself, said, "Jesus, I'm not going to be one of those people who sits around talking about what they're going to do. I'm just going to do it. Imagining the future is a kind of nostalgia." "Huh?" "You spend your whole life stuck in the labyrinth thinking about how you'll escape it one day and how awesome it will be, and imagining that future keeps you going, but you never do it. You just use the future to escape the present." A little bit more back and forth, and she changes the topic yet again, related to a commercial that's on the TV. And he says, "Sometimes I don't get you." She didn't even glance at me. She just smiled toward the television and said, "You never get me. That's the whole point." Damn. 99 days before, the whole friend group is out at the smoking hole, and they hear a branch break. It might have been a deer, but the colonel busted out anyway. A voice directly behind us said, "Don't run, Chipper." The colonel stopped and returned to us sheepishly. The eagle walked toward us slowly, his lips pursed in disgust. He wore a white t-shirt and black tie, like always. He gave each of us, in turn, the look of doom. "Y'all smell like North Carolina tobacco field in a wildfire," he said. We stood silent. I felt disproportionately terrible, like I had just been caught fleeing the scene of a murder. Would he call my parents? I'll see you in jury tomorrow at 5, he announced, and then he walked away. Alaska crouched down, picked up the cigarette she had thrown away, and started smoking again. The eagle wheeled around, his sixth sense detecting insubordination to authority figures. Alaska dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. The eagle shook his head, and even though he must have been crazy mad, I swear to God, he smiled. He loves me, Alaska told me as we walked back to the dorm circle. He loves y'all too. He just loves the school more. That's the thing. He thinks busting us is good for the school and good for us. It's the eternal struggle, Pudge. The good versus the naughty. You're awfully philosophical for a girl that just got busted. Sometimes you lose a battle, but mischief always wins the war. 98 days before, the jury is 12 students and then the eagle acts as the judge. And this is the 7th time that Alaska has been caught smoking, and she doesn't want to upset her father. Ultimately, the colonel and Alaska were the only ones that he saw actually smoking, so they're the ones that get punished. They have 10 hours of doing dishes in the cafeteria, but one more strike and their parents will be called. 89 days before, Alaska says that she found Miles a girlfriend. It's Laura, and she has set up a 1.5 date where Miles and Laura, the colonel, and his girlfriend Sarah, Jake and herself, and Takumi will all go to a basketball game, which is what they do 87 days before. Their date is absolutely insane. They go to the basketball game, and Miles is immediately jealous of Jake, and he feels like a D-bag for being jealous of him because he has Laura right there next to him. But he wants Alaska, right? He has this like crush festering for Alaska. And the colonel starts heckling again with the intent of getting kicked out of another game. But the player that he heckles is 6'7" and runs after them. Their whole friend group makes a run for it. Dude ends up chucking the basketball. It hits Miles on the back of the head. He falls to the ground. And then when he actually gets outside with the rest of the friend group, he ends up puking on Laura. And then they end up taking him to the hospital. The next morning, Miles finds out that the colonel and his girlfriend broke up. She dumped me, he said. I am concussed, I responded. So I heard, hence my waking you up. Video game? Okay, yeah, but keep it on mute, my head hurts. Yeah, I heard you puked on Laura, very suave. Dumped? I asked, getting up. Yeah, Sarah told Jake that I had a hard-on for Alaska. Those words, in that order, and I was like, well, I don't have a hard-on for anything at this moment. You can check it if you like. And Sarah thought I was being too glib, I suppose because then she said she knew it for a fact that I'd hooked up with Alaska, which incidentally is ridiculous. I don't cheat. So Alaska went ballistic, basically. No woman should ever lie about another woman. You violated the sacred covenant between women. How will stabbing one another in the back help women rise above the patriarchal oppression? And so on. And then Jake came to Alaska's defense, saying that she would never cheat because she loved him. And then I was like, don't worry about Sarah. She just likes bullying people. And then Sarah asked me why I never stood up for her. And somewhere in there, I called her a crazy bitch, which did not go over particularly well. And then the waitress asked us to leave, so we were standing in the parking lot, and she said, I've had enough. And I just stared at her, and she said, our relationship is over. Yeah, so that's it. You know what's lame, Pudge? I really care about her. I mean, we were hopeless, badly matched, but still. I mean, I said I loved her. I lost my virginity to her. You lost your virginity to her? Yeah, I never told you that. She's the only girl I've slept with. I don't know. Even though we fought like 94% of the time, I'm really sad. You're really sad? Sadder than I thought I'd be anyway. I mean, I knew it was inevitable. We haven't had a pleasant moment this whole year, ever since I got here. I mean, we just have been on each other relentlessly. I should have been a lot nicer to her. I don't know. It's sad. It is sad, I repeated. I mean, it's stupid to miss someone you don't even get along with, but I don't know. It was nice, having someone you could always fight with. I don't know what I'll do now. I mean, it was nice to have her. I'm a mad guy, Pudge. What do I do with that? You can fight with me, I said. I put my controller down and leaned back on our foam couch, and as I drifted off, I heard the colonel say, I can't be mad at you, you harmless, skinny bastard. Dude, f*** off. I think this book is cute. I think that is so funny. I love the relationship between these teenage boys. 84 days before. After a 3-day rainstorm, Miles mentions that Laura has told him their disastrous date was okay, but he's still been avoiding her. He sees Alaska eating alone in the cafeteria, and he approaches her. God, it's like it'll never end, I said, referring to the rain. Indeed. How have you been? I'm not really up for answering questions that start with how, when, where, why, or what. What's wrong? I asked. That's what. I'm not doing what's right now, all right? I should go. What? Did I do something? Of course not, sweetie. Her sweetie felt condescending, not romantic, like a boy enduring his first biblical rainstorm couldn't possibly understand her problems, whatever they were. It took sincere effort not to roll my eyes at her, though she wouldn't have even noticed as she walked out of the cafeteria with her hair dripping over her face. 76 days before, they are in their religions class, and they are given their topic, like their essay topic for the entirety of the semester. The great big question that they must answer is, what is the most important question human beings must answer? Choose your question wisely, and then examine how Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity attempt to answer it. 67 days before. The rainstorm has finally stopped, and while Miles is reading outside, Takumi asks him to go for a walk, and Takumi cracked the code. Alaska is the one who ratted out Myra and Paul, and she did it because she got caught sneaking out to see her boyfriend, so she sold them out to save her own butt. And Alaska admitted to it when Takumi confronted her. So the Colonel doesn't know? I asked, stunned. I put out my cigarette even though I wasn't quite finished because I felt spooked. I'd never suspected Alaska could be disloyal. Moody, yes, but not a rat. No, and he can't know because he'll go crazy and get her expelled. The Colonel takes all this honor and loyalty shit pretty seriously if you haven't noticed. I've noticed. Takumi shook his head. I just don't get why she'd be so afraid of getting expelled. I'd hate to get expelled, but you have to take your lumps. I don't get it. She obviously doesn't like home. True. She only goes home over Christmas and the summer when Jake is there, but whatever. I don't like home either, but I'd never give the eagle the satisfaction. Listen, Pudge, I don't know what kind of prank Alaska and the Colonel are going to come up with to end this, but I'm sure we'll both be involved. I'm telling you all of this so that you can know what you're getting into, because if you get caught, you had better take it. I swear to God, I won't rat. I finally understood that day at the jury. Alaska wanted to show us that we could trust her. Survival at Culver Creek meant loyalty, and she had ignored that, but then she'd shown me the way. She and the Colonel had taken the fall for me to show me how it was done so that I would know what to do when the time came. Because he was smoking, right? Technically at the smoking hole. And when they talked to the jury, they said that it was just them. And then because the eagle only saw them, that's what they went with. So they saved Takumi and Miles from getting in trouble. So 58 days before, it's about a week later, and Alaska goes up to Miles and she's like, hey, I heard Takumi told you what happened with Myra and Paul, and I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. In other news, are you staying here for Thanksgiving? Because I am. He's like, oh, sorry, I'm going home. She says, oh, don't be. I have loads to do. There's a prank to plan, but I was thinking you should stay here too. In fact, I have composed a list. A list? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavily folded piece of notebook paper and began to read. Why Pudge should stay at the creek for Thanksgiving. A list by Alaska Young. 1. Because he is a very conscientious student. Pudge has been deprived of many wonderful Culver Creek experiences, including, but not limited to, A. Drinking wine with me in the woods, and B. Getting up early on Saturday to eat breakfast at the Mick and Edible and then driving through the greater Birmingham area, smoking cigarettes and talking about how pathetically boring the greater Birmingham area is. And also C. Going out late at night and lying by the dewy soccer field and reading a book by moonlight. 2. Although she certainly does not excel at endeavors such as teaching the French language, Madame O'Malley makes a mean stuffing, and she invites all the students who stay on campus to Thanksgiving dinner, which is usually just me and the South Korean exchange student, but whatever. Pudge would be welcome. 3. I don't really have a 3, but 1 and 2 were awfully good. 1 and 2 appealed to me, certainly, but mostly I liked the idea of just her and me on campus. I'll talk to my parents once they wake up, I said. She coaxed me onto the couch, and we played games together until she abruptly stopped and dropped the controller. I'm not flirting, I'm just tired, she said, kicking off her flip-flops. She pulled her feet onto the foam couch, tucking them behind a cushion, and scooted up to put her head in my lap. My corduroys, my boxers, 2 layers. I could feel the warmth of her cheek on my thigh. There are times when it is appropriate, even preferable, to get an erection when someone's face is in close proximity to your penis. This was not one of those times. So I stopped thinking about the layers and the warmth, muted the TV, and focused on the game. At 8:30, I turned it off and scooted out from underneath Alaska. She turned on her back, still asleep, the lines of my corduroy pants imprinted on her cheek. He calls his parents with the reasoning that he'll stay behind and just study for his classes more, and they're a little bit upset by it, but they're not going to make him come home. Like, they're supportive of it. He tells the Colonel about this plan that he's staying back. He says, yeah, I feel a little guilty about ditching my parents, though. Yeah, well, you're staying here in hopes of making out with Alaska. I sure wish you wouldn't. If you unmoor her from the rock that is Jake, God have mercy on us all. That would be some drama indeed, and as a rule, I like to avoid drama. It's not because I wanted to make out with her. Hold on. He grabbed a pencil and scrawled excitedly at the paper as if he had just made a mathematical breakthrough and then looked back up at me. I just did some calculations, and I've been able to determine that you are full of shit. He does genuinely, feel bad, though. So during third period, I called my mom at work. I wanted her to say that it was okay, I guess, for me to stay at the creek for Thanksgiving and reassure me, but I didn't quite expect her to excitedly tell me that she and Dad had bought plane tickets to England immediately after I called and were planning to spend Thanksgiving in a castle on their second honeymoon. Oh, that's awesome, I said, and then quickly got off the phone because I did not want her to hear me cry. I guess Alaska heard me slam down the phone from her room because she opened the door as I turned away but said nothing. He just walks around the campus and just feels homesick and sad, but eventually he sees Alaska and he goes over to her. She says, "Hey, I was looking for you." "Hey." "I'm really sorry, Pudge," she said, and she put her arms around me, resting her head against my shoulder. It occurred to me that she didn't even know what had happened, but she still sounded sincere. "What am I gonna do?" "You'll spend Thanksgiving with me, silly. Here. So why don't you go home for vacations?" "I'm just scared of ghosts, Pudge, and home is full of them." 52 days before, after everyone left, after the colonel's mom showed up in a beat-up hatchback and he threw his giant duffel bag into the back seat, and after he said, "I'm not much for saying goodbye, but I'll see you in a week. Don't do anything I wouldn't do." And after a green limousine arrived for Laura, whose father was the only doctor in some small town in southern Alabama, and after I joined Alaska on a harrowing "we don't need no stinking brakes" drive to the airport to drop off Takumi, and after the campus settled into an eerie quiet with no door slamming and no music playing and no one laughing and no one screaming, after all of that, we made our way to the soccer field, and she took me to the edge of the field where the woods start. Beneath the full moon, she cast a shadow, and you could see the curve from her waist to her hips in the shadow, and while she stopped, and she said, "Dig." "Dig?" "Dig." We went on like that for a bit, and then I got on my knees and dug through the soft black dirt at the edge of the woods. Before I could get very far, my fingers scratched glass, and I dug around the glass until I pulled out a pink bottle of wine. Strawberry Hill, it was called. I have a fake ID, but it sucks. So every time I go to the liquor store, I try to buy 10 bottles of this and some vodka for the colonel. So when it finally works, I'm covered for the semester. And then I give the colonel his vodka and he puts it in whatever he puts it in. And I take mine and bury it. "Because you're a pirate," I said. "Aye, matey." "Precisely. Although wine consumption has risen a bit this semester, so we'll need to take a trip tomorrow. This is the last bottle." She unscrewed the cap. "No corks here." Sipped and handed it to me. "Don't worry about the eagle tonight. He's just happy most everyone's gone. He's probably masturbating for the first time in a month." I worried about it for a moment as I held the bottle by its neck, but I wanted to trust her, and so I did. I took a minor sip, and as soon as I swallowed, I felt my body rejecting the stinging syrup of it. It washed back up my esophagus, but I swallowed hard, and there, yes, I did it. I was drinking on campus. So they lay in the soccer field, read books, get drunk, hang out, and they're laying together in this field, and she's drawing circles on his thigh, just kind of as they're talking. I thought it might be a fine time to say the 3 little words, and I steeled myself to say them as I stared up at the starriest night, convinced myself she felt it too, that her hand so alive and vivid against my leg was more than playful, and Laura and Jake, because I do, Alaska Young, I do love you, and what else matters but that? And my lips parted to speak, but before I could even begin to breathe out the words, she said, "It's not about life or death, the labyrinth." Okay, so what is it? "Suffering. Doing wrong and having wrong things happen to you. That's the problem. Bolivar was talking about the pain, not about living or dying. How do you get out of the labyrinth of suffering?" "What's wrong?" I asked, and I felt the absence of her hand on me. "Nothing's wrong, but there's always suffering, Pudge. Homework or malaria or having a boyfriend who lives far away when there's a good-looking boy lying next to you. Suffering is universal. It's the one thing Buddhists, Christians, and Muslims are all worried about." I turned to her. "Oh, so maybe Dr. Hyde's class isn't total bullshit." And both of us, lying on our sides, she smiled, our noses almost touching, my unblinking eyes on hers, her face blushing from the wine, and I opened my mouth again, but this time not to speak, and she reached up and put a finger on my lips and said, "Shh, shh, don't ruin it." I'm just cheesing. It's not even I don't even know what to say. I'm just going to keep reading. 51 days before. Now that everyone is gone, they have 7 days of freedom, and they start off by sneaking into the weekday warriors' rooms to see what they love so that they can use it against them as a prank. And they find out that the weekday warriors love their hair, and the chapter ends with Alaska wondering aloud how they could get their hands on industrial blue hair dye. 49 days before, 2 days later, Monday, the first real day of vacation, I spent the morning working on my religion final and went to Alaska's room in the afternoon. She was reading in bed. Auden, she announced. What were his last words? I don't know. I never heard of him. Never heard of him? You poor illiterate boy. Here, read this line. I walked over and looked down at her index finger. You should love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart, I read aloud. Yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good? Sure. And fried food is pretty good. Sex is pretty fun. The sun is pretty hot. Jesus, it says so much about love and brokenness. It's perfect. I nodded unenthusiastically. You're hopeless. You want to go porn hunting? Huh? We can't love our neighbors till we know how crooked their hearts are. Don't you like porn? I answered. The truth was that I hadn't seen much porn, but the idea of looking at porn with Alaska had a certain appeal. We started with the 50s wing of the dorm. We will continue that discussion in a second. But for her to ask about Auden is crazy for me as an adult woman who, W.H. Auden, Funeral Blues, is my favorite poem of all time. I read it before in my rant review that I did for Promises and Pomegranates, because in that book, a letter that the mom wrote her son had a citation of part of that poem, and I read it aloud in that because it's so freaking good, and I'm going to read it again to you now, just so you can understand. Like, I have had this poem in my back pocket as a favorite probably since like 2012. It would have been long enough after I read this book that I wouldn't have had that correlation, and plus his name is literally said that one time in this book. So I would have had no idea that this was connected. But I found this shortly after, and I have like carried this in my soul since then. Weird, dude. Life is so strange. Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos with a muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come, let airplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows around the white necks of the public doves, let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest. My noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good. I've probably read that thing like 100 times, and it still makes me want to cry. Anyway, they go through all of the dorms and they find a bunch of adult content. There's certain words that I can't say on YouTube, right? Like, I'm gonna have to mute all the other times that I said that word before anyway. They go through and they find a bunch of booze in people's dorm rooms. They find cigarettes. They find a whole bunch of explicit adult material. And she's thinking to herself, God, I could have ratted out anyone. So they find an actual video. All the other ones have been like magazines or photos or whatever, but they find a literal VHS tape. Alaska read the sticker on top of the video, "The Bitches of Madison County." Well, ain't that just delightful? We ran with it to the TV room, closed the blinds, locked the door, and watched the movie. It opened with a woman standing on a bridge with her legs spread while a guy knelt in front of her, giving her oral. No time for dialogue, I suppose. By the time they started doing it, Alaska commenced with her righteous indignation. They just don't make sex look fun for women. The girl is just an object. Look at that. I was already looking, needless to say. A woman crouched on her hands and knees while a guy knelt behind her. She kept saying, "Give it to me," and moaning, and though her eyes, brown and blank, betrayed her lack of interest, I couldn't help but take mental notes. Hands on her shoulders, I noted. Fast but not too fast, or it's going to be over fast. Keep your grunting to a minimum. As if reading my mind, she said, "God, Pudge, never do it that hard. That would hurt. That looks like torture. And all she can do is just sit there and take it? That is not a man and a woman. That is a penis and a vagina. What is erotic about that? Where's the kissing?" Given their position, I don't think they can kiss right now. That's my point. Just by virtue of how they're doing it, it's objectification. He can't even see her face. This is what can happen to women, Pudge. That woman is someone's daughter. This is what you make us do for money. Well, not me. I mean, not technically. I don't, like, produce porn movies. Look at me in the eye and tell me this doesn't turn you on, Pudge. I couldn't. She laughed. It was fine, she said. Healthy. And then she got up, stopped the tape, lay down on her stomach across the couch, and mumbled something. What did you say? I asked, walking to her, putting my hand on the small of her back. Shh, I'm sleeping. Just like that. From 100 miles an hour to a sleep in a nanosecond. I wanted so badly to lie down next to her on the couch, to wrap my arms around her and sleep. Not fuck like in those movies, not even have sex, just sleep together in the most innocent sense of the phrase. But I lacked the courage, and she had a boyfriend, and I was gawky, and she was gorgeous, and I was hopelessly boring, and she was endlessly fascinating. So I walked back to my room and collapsed on the bottom bunk, thinking that if people were rain, I was drizzle, and she was a hurricane. You can say whatever you want. I don't think that this is an inaccurate depiction of conversations that 16-year-olds have with each other. I don't think that that is an inaccurate representation of a 16-year-old girl wanting attention or like wanting to feel desired. I don't think that anything that Alaska said or did is out of the realm of possibility. Right? Well, and I don't even want to like get into this whole freaking philosophical thing, and obviously I'm speaking from like my experiences and from like, you know, the friendships and conversations that I've had and the women that I grew up being the girls, I guess technically, that I grew up being friends with, and how we acted around boys is like none of what's happening in the discussions that have happened so far is unrealistic. You can make the argument like, you know, 16-year-olds shouldn't be reading this material. And I'm like, dude, you honest to God, you really think that 16-year-olds aren't talking about that stuff? Aren't doing or saying some of this stuff? Especially in 2005 when this was written in like the early 2010s and stuff, especially then? You're lying to yourself and you're crazy. 47 days before. It's the next day, and Miles finds Alaska in her room. She's burning candles. One of her projects to waste time was to melt all of the candles that she had into one giant monster candle volcano thing, just to pass time. It doesn't really do anything, but they end up doing it together, and he comes in and she says, "Night falls fast. Today is in the past." Wait, I've read that before. What is that? It's a poem. Edna St. Vincent Millay. You've read it? I'm stunned. Oh, no, I read her biography. I didn't have her last words in it, though, so I was a little bitter. All I remember is that she had a lot of sex. I know, she's my hero. Does it seem odd to you that you enjoy biographies of great writers a lot more than you enjoy their actual writing? No. Just because they were interesting people doesn't mean I care to hear their musings on nighttime. It's about depression, dumbass. Oh, really? Well, geez, and it's brilliant. All right, the snow may be falling in the winter of my discontent, but at least I've got sarcastic company. Sit down, will ya? Night falls fast. Today is in the past. After 2 hours of begging for a ride to McDonald's, Alaska decided that it was time for lunch. As we began to walk to the student parking lot, I saw a strange car, a small green car, a hatchback. I've seen that car, I thought. Where have I seen that car? And then the colonel jumped out and ran to meet us. Rather like, I don't know, hello or something. The colonel began, "I have been instructed to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner," Alaska whispered in my ear, and then I laughed and I said, "I have been instructed to accept your invitation." So we walked over to the Eagles' house and told him we were going to eat turkey trailer park style and sped away in the hatchback. I don't know why that makes me want to cry. I am like borderline tears the entire way that I am talking about this book to you. And I don't know if it is because of like a level of nostalgia or just cute friendships, like cute 16-year-olds all banding together. It's just like, I am like so broken inside. This is like, I'm like literally like teary-eyed just freaking reading it. The colonel explained it to us on the 2-hour car ride south. I was crammed into the back seat because Alaska had called shotgun. She usually drove, but when she didn't, she was the shotgun calling queen of the world. The colonel's mother heard that we were on campus and couldn't bear the thought of leaving us familyless for Thanksgiving. The colonel didn't seem too keen on the whole idea. "I'm gonna have to sleep in a tent," he said, and I laughed. Except it turns out he did have to sleep in a tent. The Colonel's mom lived in a trailer, as in the kind of thing that you might see attached to a large pickup truck. Except this particular one was old and falling apart on cinder blocks. It probably couldn't have been hooked up to a truck without disintegrating. It wasn't even a particularly big trailer. I could just barely stand up at my full height without scraping the ceiling. Now I understood why the Colonel was short. He couldn't afford to be any taller. The place was really one long room, with a full-size bed in the front, a kitchenette, and a living area in the back with a TV and small bathroom. So small that in order to take a shower, you pretty much had to sit on the toilet. It ain't much, the Colonel's mom. That's Dolores, not Miss Martin, told us. But y'all are gonna have a turkey the size of the kitchen, she laughed. The Colonel ushered us out of the trailer immediately after our brief tour, and we walked through the neighborhood, a series of trailers and mobile homes on dirt roads. Well, now I get why you hate rich people. I couldn't fathom how the Colonel grew up in such a small place. The entire trailer was smaller than our dorm room. I didn't know what to say to him, how to make him feel less embarrassed. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable. I know it's probably foreign. Not to me, Alaska piped up. Well, you don't live in a trailer, he told her. Poor is poor. Alaska goes inside to help the mom with finishing up dinner. The Colonel and Miles are talking and saying, I finished my religion paper, but I have to type it up on your computer when we get back. I think I'm ready for finals, which is good, since we have an ink pray to an and play. Your mom doesn't know Pig Latin, I smirked. Not if I talk fast. Christ, be quiet. The food. Fried okra, steamed corn on the cob. The pot roast was so tender it fell off the plastic fork. Dolores was also the funniest mom that I'd ever met. When Alaska asked her what she did for work, she smiled and said, I'm a culinary engineer. That's a short order cook at Waffle House to y'all. Best Waffle House in Alabama. The Colonel smiled. And then I realized he wasn't embarrassed of his mom at all. He was just scared that we would act like condescending boarding school snobs. I'd always found the Colonel's I hate the rich routine a little overwrought until I saw him with his mom. He was the same Colonel, but in a totally different context. It made me hope one day that I could meet Alaska's family too. Dolores insisted that Alaska and I share the bed, and she slept on the pullout while the Colonel was out in his tent. I worried he would get cold, but frankly, I wasn't about to give up the bed with Alaska. We had separate blankets, and there were never fewer than 3 layers between us, but the possibilities kept me up half the night. 46 days before and 44 days before. These are pretty short. I'm just going to end up reading them out loud to you. A lot of this book, hey, most of this is just kind of going to turn into an audiobook, I think, more than anything, because I just love it so much, and it's such a quick read. I think it's only 220 pages. Yeah, it's only 220 pages. So I'm just going to end up reading aloud a lot. Hope you like it. 46 days before. Best Thanksgiving food I ever had. No crappy cranberry sauce, just huge slabs of moist white meat, corn, green beans cooked in enough bacon fat to make them taste like they weren't good for you, biscuits with gravy, pumpkin pie for dessert, and a glass of red wine for each of us. I believe, Doris said, that you're supposed to drink white with turkey, but now I don't know about y'all, but I don't suppose I give a shit. We laughed and drank our wine, and then after the meal, we each listed our gratitudes. I was thankful for the fine food and the fine company, for having a home on Thanksgiving. A trailer, at least, Dolores joked. Okay, my turn. I'm grateful for having just had my best Thanksgiving in a decade. Then the Colonel said, I'm just grateful for you, Mom. And Dolores laughed and said, that dog won't hunt, boy. I didn't exactly know what that phrase meant, but apparently it meant that was inadequate, because then the Colonel expanded his list to acknowledge that he was grateful to be the smartest human being in this trailer park. And Dolores laughed and said, good enough. And Dolores, she was grateful that her phone was back on, that her boy was home, that Alaska helped her cook, and that I had kept the Colonel out of her hair, that her job was steady and her coworkers were nice, and that she had a place to sleep and a boy who loved her. I sat in the back of the hatchback on the drive home, and that is how I thought of it. Home, and fell asleep to the highway's monotonous lullaby. 44 days before. Coosa Liquor's entire business model is built around selling cigarettes to minors and alcohol to adults. Alaska looked at me with disconcerting frequency when she drove, particularly when we were winding through a narrow, hilly highway south of the school, headed to aforementioned Coosa Liquors. It was Saturday, our last day of real vacation, which is great if all you need is cigarettes, but we need booze, and they card for booze, and my ID blows, but I'll flirt my way through it. She made a sudden and unsignaled left turn, pulling onto a road that dropped down a hill with fields on either side, and she gripped the steering wheel tight as we accelerated, and she waited until the last possible moment to brake, just before we reached the bottom of the hill. There stood a plywood gas station. No longer sold gas, with a faded sign bolted to the roof. Coosa Liquor, we cater to your spiritual needs. She goes inside, she buys a 5th of vodka for the Colonel, 5 bottles of wine, 3 cartons of cigarettes, and on the way home, Alaska says, you like knock-knock jokes? Knock-knock jokes? You mean like knock-knock? Who's there? Who? Hoo-hoo. What are you? An owl? Lame. That was brilliant. I have one. You start. Okay, knock knock. Who's there? I looked at her blankly. About a minute later, I got it and laughed. My mom told me that joke when I was 6. It's still funny. With that, though, telling jokes on this drive home, I could not have been more surprised when she showed up sobbing at room 43, just as I was putting the finishing touches on my final paper for English. She sat down on the couch, every exhalation a mix of a whimper and a scream. "I'm sorry," she said, heaving. Snot was dribbling down her chin. "What's wrong?" She picked up a Kleenex from the coffee table and wiped at her face. "I don't," she started, and then a sob came out like a tsunami, her cry so loud and childlike that it scared me. And I got up, I sat down next to her, and I put my arm around her. She turned away, pushing her head into the foam couch. "I don't understand why you screw everything up." "What, like with Mariah? Maybe you were just scared." "Scared isn't a good excuse. Scared is the excuse everybody has always used." I don't know who everyone was or always was, and as much as I wanted to understand her ambiguities, the slyness was growing annoying. "Why are you upset about this now?" "It's not just that, it's everything, but I told the colonel in the car." She sniffled, but seemed done with her sobs. "While you were sleeping in the back, and he said he would never let me out of his sight during pranks, that he couldn't trust me on my own, and I don't blame him. I don't even trust me." It took guts to tell him. "I have guts, just not when it counts. Will you, She sat up straight and then moved toward me. I raised my arm as she collapsed into my skinny chest and cried. I felt bad for her, but she'd done it to herself. She didn't have to rat. "I don't want to upset you, but maybe you just need to tell us all why you told on Mariah. Were you scared of going home or something?" She pulled away from me and gave me a look of doom that would have made the eagle proud, and I felt like she hated me or hated my question or both, and then she looked away, out the window toward the soccer field, and said, "There is no home." "Well, you have a family." I backpedaled. She'd talked to me about her mom just this morning. How could this girl who told jokes about 3 hours before become a sobbing mess? Still staring at me, she said, "I try not to be scared, but I still ruin everything. I still up." "Okay, it's okay." I didn't even know what she was talking about anymore, one vague notion after another. "Don't you know who you love, Pudge? You love the girl who makes you laugh and shows you porn and drinks wine with you. You don't love the crazy, sullen bitch." And there was something to that, truth be told. We cut to Christmas, and for Christmas break, Miles does actually go home and does actually study for school. He realizes how grateful that he is for his family. 8 days before, they're back at school, and the Colonel and Alaska are planning a pre-prank. They have a much larger one planned, and this one is to lure the eagle into a false sense of security. That weekend, the entire friend group will be staying in a nearby barn, but she and the Colonel will need to figure out more of the pre-prank logistics. And Miles is a little upset that she's not planning it with him, thinking to himself, "I left." It wasn't the first time Alaska had left me out of the loop, certainly, but after we'd been together so much over Thanksgiving, it seemed ridiculous to plan the prank with the Colonel, but without me. Whose t-shirts were wet with her tears? Mine. Who'd listened to her read? Me. Who'd been the butt of the world's worst knock-knock joke? Me. I walked to the sunny convenience kiosk across from the school and smoked. This never happened to me in Florida, this oh-so-high school angst about who likes whom more, and I hated myself for letting it happen now. You don't have to care about her, I told myself. Screw her. 4 days before. The Colonel still won't tell Miles much about the prank, but while he's waiting, Miles is just studying and he finishes writing his religion paper. My answer to the question was straightforward enough, really. Most Christians and Muslims believe in heaven and hell, though there's a lot of disagreement within both religions over what exactly will get you into one afterlife or the other. Buddhists are more complicated because of the Buddhist doctrine that basically says that people don't have eternal souls. Instead, they have a bundle of energy, and that bundle of energy is transitory, migrating from one body to another, reincarnating endlessly until it eventually reaches enlightenment. I never liked writing concluding paragraphs to papers where you just repeat what you already said with phrases like "in summary" or "to conclude." I didn't do that. Instead, I talked about why I thought it was an important question. People, I thought, wanted security. They couldn't bear the idea of death being a big black nothing. Couldn't bear the thought that their loved ones not existing, and couldn't even imagine themselves not existing. I finally decided that people believed in an afterlife because they couldn't bear not to. 3 days before, On the Friday after finals, Miles packs his bag for the barn night prank. Chip convinces the Eagle that Miles and Takumi are going to his home over the weekend as a cover for their absence from campus. They meet with Alaska and Laura at the barn to go over the 3-part prank, which will include lighting fireworks to distract the Eagle, putting blue hair dye in the Weekday Warriors hair products, and sneaking onto the Eagle's computer to send out fake bad grade reports to the Weekday Warriors' parents. Miles and Takumi are given the task of setting off a series of fireworks near the Eagle's house, and again, at set times as they lead the Eagle deeper and deeper into the woods. They make it through the woods despite Miles getting bitten by a swan. When they arrive back at the barn, they find Laura there. Chip and Alaska arrive shortly afterward, and Chip is angry that Alaska had sent fake grade reports to more students than planned. He worries that this will make it easier for them to be caught, but Alaska reassures him that it will be fine. 2 days before, they all wake up in the barn, and it's pretty much just them hanging out and drinking. They, rap at each other. It's pretty goofy. They go through the day playing these different drinking games, and Alaska randomly announces, out of nowhere, best day, worst day. Huh? We're all going to puke if we just drink, so let's slow it down with a drinking game. Best day, worst day. Never heard of it, the colonel said. 'Cause I just made it up, she smiled. She lay on her side across 2 bales of hay, the afternoon light brightening the green in her eyes, her tan skin the last memory of fall. With her mouth half open, it occurred to me that she must already be drunk as I noticed the far-off look in her eyes. The 1,000-yard stare of intoxication, I thought. And just as I watched her with idle fascination, it occurred to me that, yeah, I was a little drunk too. Everybody tells a story of their best day. The best storyteller doesn't have to drink. And then everyone tells a story of their worst day, and the best storyteller doesn't have to drink. Then we keep going. The second best day, the second worst day, until one of y'all quits. How do you know it'll be one of us? Takumi asked. 'Cause I'm the best drinker and the best storyteller. You start, Pudge. Best day of your life. He goes on to say that day, today was the best day of his life. Alaska goes on to say that the best day of my life was January 9th, 1997. I was 8 years old, and my mom and I went to the zoo on a class trip. I liked the bears. She liked the monkeys. Best day ever. End of story. That's it? The best day of your whole life? Yep. Lame, the colonel said. Laura then goes and tells her best day. It was her immigrating to the United States. Then the colonel talks, and he says, the best day of my life hasn't happened yet, but I know it. I see it every day. The best day of my life will be the day that I buy my mom a huge fucking house. And not just out in the woods, but in the middle of Mountain Brook with all the Weekday Warriors parents. With all y'all's parents. And I'm not buying it with a mortgage either. I'm buying it with cash money. And I'm driving my mom there. And I'm going to open her side of the car door. And she'll get out and look at this house. This house is like a picket fence and 2 stories and everything, And I'm just going to hand her the keys to the house. And I'll say, thanks. Man, she helped fill out my application to this place. And she let me come here. And that's no easy thing when you come from where we do. To let your son go away to school. So that's the best day of my life. Okay. Takumi says that his best day was when he lost his virginity, and if you think I'm going to tell you more of that story, you're going to have to get me drunker than this. So they say that the colonel won that round, and now they go and talk about worst days. The colonel says that his worst day was when his dad left. He's old, 70 now, and he was old when he married my mom, but he still cheated on her, and she caught him, and she got pissed, so he hit her, and then she kicked him out, and he left. I was there, and my mom called, and she didn't tell me the whole story with the cheating and everything and the hitting until later. She just said that he was gone and not coming back, and I haven't seen him since. All that day I kept waiting for him to call me and explain it, but he never did. He never called at all. I at least thought he would say goodbye or something. That was the worst day. Miles's worst day doesn't compare because it was some stupid thing about not having a uniform for gym class. Laura goes on to say that her worst day was probably also her best day, because when she immigrated, she was also the only one in her family that knew English enough to get by. So even though she was super happy to be in America, she now had to take on so much responsibility and roles of being an adult and helping her parents translate and communicate W-2 forms and stuff like that. Takumi's worst day was in the year 2000 when his grandmother died literally 2 days before he was supposed to go back home and visit her and meet her and stuff. And then Alaska's worst day is the day after my mom took me to the zoo where she liked the monkeys and I liked the bears. It was Friday. I came home from school. She gave me a hug and told me to go do my homework in my room so I could watch TV later. I went to my room and she sat down in the kitchen table, and then she screamed, and I ran out and she had fallen over. She was lying on the floor, holding her head and jerking, and I freaked out. I should have called 911, but I just started screaming and crying until finally she stopped jerking, and I thought she had fallen asleep, and whatever had hurt her didn't hurt anymore. So I just sat there on the floor with her until my dad got home an hour later, and he's screaming, "Why didn't you call 911?" and trying to give her CPR, but by then she was plenty dead. Aneurysm. Worst day. I win, you drink. And so we did. No one talked for a minute. And then Takumi asked, "Your dad blamed you?" "Well, not after that first moment, but yeah, how could he not? You were a little kid," Takumi argued. I was too surprised and uncomfortable to talk, trying to fit this into what I knew about Alaska's family. Her mom told her the knock-knock joke when Alaska was 6. Her mom used to smoke, but didn't anymore. Obviously. "Yeah, I was a little kid. Little kids can dial 911. They do it all the time. Give me the wine," she said, deadpan and emotionless. She drank without lifting her head from the hay. "I'm sorry," Takumi said. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" the colonel asked, his voice soft. "It never came up." And then we stopped asking questions. What the hell do you say? In the long quiet that followed, as we passed around the wine and slowly became drunker, I found myself thinking about the President William McKinley, the third American president to be assassinated. He lived for several days after he was shot, and toward the end, his wife started crying and screaming, "I want to go too! I want to go too!" And with his last measure of strength, McKinley turned to her and spoke his last words. "We are all going." It was the central moment of Alaska's life, when she cried and told me that she fucked up everything. I knew what she meant now, and when she said she failed everyone, I knew whom she meant. It was the everything and the everyone of her life, and so I could not help but imagine it. I imagined a scrawny 8-year-old with dirty fingers looking down at her mother convulsing. So she sat down with her dead, or maybe not, mother, who I imagine was not breathing by then, but wasn't cold yet either. And in the time between dying and death, a little Alaska sat with her mother in silence. And then through the silence and my drunkenness, I caught a glimpse of her, as she might have been. She must have come to feel so powerless, I thought, that the one thing she might have done, pick up the phone and call an ambulance, never even occurred to her. There come times when we realize that our parents cannot save themselves or save us, that everyone who wades through time eventually gets dragged out to sea by the undertow, that, in short, we are all going. So she became impulsive, scared by her inaction into perpetual action. When the eagle confronted her with expulsion, maybe she blurted out Mariah's name because it was the first thing that came to mind. Because in that moment, she didn't want to get expelled, and she couldn't think past that moment. She was scared, sure, but more importantly, she'd been scared of being paralyzed by fear again. "We're all going," McKinley said to his wife, "and we sure are. There's your labyrinth of suffering. We are all going. Find your way out of the maze." They go on to continue. Everybody's getting drunk. Alaska goes and makes herself throw up because she's too drunk. And Miles and Laura end up making out. And he asks if she wants to be his girlfriend. She says, "Yes, please." And they slept together in her sleeping bag, which felt a little crowded, to be honest, but it still was nice. I had never felt another person against me as I slept. It was a fine way to end the best day of my life. One day before. The next morning, a term I use loosely since it was not yet dawn, the colonel shook me awake. Laura was wrapped in my arms, folded into my body. "We gotta go, Pudge. Time to roll up." "Dude, sleeping." "You can sleep after we check in. It's time to go." Everybody packs everything quickly, and they all get together, and they're like trekking through the woods to get back to campus. "How you doing?" the colonel asks Alaska, who looked like a train wreck but insisted on pouring the last few sips of Strawberry Hill into her cold instant coffee before chucking the bottle behind her. "I've had better mornings." "Hungover?" "Like an alcoholic preacher on Sunday morning." "Maybe you shouldn't drink so much," I suggested. "Pudge." She shook her head and sipped the cold coffee and wine. "Pudge, what you must understand about me is that I am a deeply unhappy person." They all check in, they go back into their dorm rooms, and it is a totally uneventful day. The last day. The next morning, the first Monday of the new semester, the colonel came out of the shower just as my alarm went off. They go to class. The weekday warriors have blue in their hair, their hair's all dyed up. That afternoon, Miles spends it with Laura. We were very cutesy, even though we didn't know the first thing about each other and we barely talked. Hi friends, this is editing Kaylee speaking. I realized that I left out some important context for the scene that I'm about to read. So, the following is the sexually explicit content that people are seeking censorship of and like providing as justification for challenging and banning this book. So I chose to read it in its entirety and read it in the context of this book, as well as a scene in a following chapter, just so you have like a full concept of what people are talking about and what people are referencing when they are talking about banning this book. I have a quote from John Green that discusses it in his justification, I guess, or commentary on the situation. So I will read his response once I finish the other scene, but I don't want to like spoil it for you since I'm about to talk about that also. But I did just want to give you a heads up that I will be reading a explicit scene between Miles and his girlfriend. So I'll put up a little thing in the corner, so if you want to skip over this stuff, you're more than welcome to. It makes you uncomfortable or whatever, I'll give you a timestamp to go to. And they're hanging out, and then she, out of the blue, asks, "Have you ever gotten a blowjob?" So then he's like, "That was out of left field. What are you what is happening?" "I've just never given one," she answered, her voice dripping with seductiveness. It was so brazen, I thought I would explode. I never thought, from Alaska, hearing that stuff was one thing, but to hear her sweet Romanian voice go so sexy all of a sudden, "No," I said, I never have. "You think it would be fun?" Internally, do I? With a bunch of exclamation points and question marks. Yeah, you don't have to. "I think I want to." And then Laura unbuttoned my pants and pulled my boxers down a little and pulled out my penis. "Wow," she says. "What?" "It's weird." She looked up at me but didn't move, her face nanometers away from my penis. "What do you mean, weird?" "It's just big, I guess." I could live with that kind of weird. And then she wrapped her hand around it and put it in her mouth and waited. We were both very still. She did not move a muscle in her body, and I did not move a muscle in mine. I knew that at this point something else was supposed to happen, but I wasn't quite sure what. She stayed still. I could feel her nervous breath for a few minutes. And then she took it out of her mouth and looked up at me quizzically. "Should I do something?" I don't know," I said. Everything I'd learned from watching porn with Alaska suddenly exited my brain. I thought maybe she should just move her head up and down, but wouldn't that choke her? So I just stayed quiet. "Should I, bite it?" "No, don't bite. I don't think. I think, that felt good. It was nice. I don't know if there's something else." You didn't. Maybe we should ask Alaska." So we went to her room and asked Alaska. She laughed and laughed, sitting on her bed. She laughed until she cried. She walked into the bathroom and returned with a tube of toothpaste and showed us, in detail. Never have I so wanted to be crust complete. Laura and I went back to her room where she did exactly what Alaska told her to do, and I did exactly what Alaska said I would do, which was die 100 little ecstatic deaths. My fists clenched, my body shaking. It was my first orgasm with a girl, and afterward, I was embarrassed and nervous, and so clearly was Laura, who finally broke the silence by asking, "So, want to do some homework?" There was little to do on the first day of the semester, but she read for her English class. I picked up a biography of Argentinian revolutionary Che Guevara, whose face adorned a poster on the wall that Laura's roommate had on her bookshelf, and then I lay next to Laura on the bottom bunk. I began at the end, as I sometimes did with biographies. I had no intention of reading all the way through, and I found his last words without too much searching. Captured by the Bolivian army, Guevara said, "Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man." I thought back to Bolivar's last words in Garcia Marquez's novel. How will I ever get out of this labyrinth? South American revolutionaries, it would seem, died with a flare. I read the last words out loud to Laura. She turned on her side, placing her head on my chest. "Why do you like last words so much?" Strange as it might seem, I'd never really thought about why. I don't know. Sometimes just because they're funny, but a lot of times people die how they live. And so last words tell me a lot about who the people were and why they became the sort of people biographies get written about. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then she went back to reading. I didn't know how to talk to her, and I was frustrated with trying after a little while, so I got up to go. I kissed her goodbye. I could do that at least. I picked up Alaska and the Colonel at our room, and we walked down to the bridge. I repeated in embarrassing detail the fellatio fiasco. "I can't believe she went down on you twice in one day." "Only technically really once," Alaska corrected. "Still, Pudge got his hog smoked." "The poor Colonel," Alaska said with a rueful smile. "I'd give you a pity blow, but I really am attached to Jake." "That's just creepy," Colonel said. "You're only supposed to flirt with Pudge." "But Pudge has a girlfriend," she laughed. That night, the Colonel and I walked down to Alaska's room to celebrate our bar night success. She and the Colonel had been celebrating a lot the past couple days, and I didn't feel up to climbing Strawberry Hill, so I sat and munched on pretzels while Alaska and the Colonel drank from paper cups with flowers on them. "We ain't drinking out of the bottle tonight, hun," the Colonel said. "We classing it up." "It's an old-time Southern drinking contest," Alaska responded. "We's a-gonna treat Pudge to an evening of real Southern living. We gonna match each Dixie cup for Dixie cup till the lesser drinker falls." And that's pretty much what they did, pausing only to turn out the lights at 11 or so the Eagle wouldn't drop by. They chatted some, but mostly they drank, and I drifted out of the conversation and ended up squinting through the dark, looking at the book spines in Alaska's Life Library. I could have stayed up until morning reading through the haphazard stacks of titles. A dozen white tulips in a plastic vase were precariously perched atop one of the book stacks, and when I asked her about them, she just said, "Jake's and my anniversary." And I didn't care to continue that line of dialogue, so I went back to scanning the titles, and I was just wondering how I could go about learning Edgar Allan Poe's last words, for the record, "Lord help my poor soul," when I heard Alaska say, "Pudge isn't even listening to us." "I'm listening. We were just talking about Truth or Dare, played out in 7th grade or still cool?" "Never played it. No friends in 7th grade." "Well, that does it," she shouted, a bit too loud given the late hour, and also given the fact that she was openly drinking wine in her room. "Truth or Dare?" "All right, but I'm not making out with the Colonel. Can't make out, too drunk." "Truth or Dare, Pudge?" "Dare." "Hook up with me." So I did. It was that quick. I laughed, looked nervous, and she leaned in and tilted her head to the side, and we were kissing. 0 layers between us, our tongues dancing back and forth in each other's mouth until there was no her mouth and my mouth, but only our mouths intertwined. She tasted like cigarettes and Mountain Dew and wine and chapstick. Her hand came to my face, and I felt her soft fingers tracing the line of my jaw. We lay down as we kissed, she on top of me, and I began to move beneath her. I pulled away for a moment to say, "What's going on here?" And she just put one finger to her lips and we kissed again. A hand grabbed one of mine and she placed it on her stomach. I moved slowly on top of her and felt her arching her back fluidly beneath me. I pulled away again. "What about Laura? Jake?" Again, she shushed me. "Less tongue, more lips," she said, and I tried my best. I thought the tongue was the whole point, but she was the expert. "Christ," the Colonel said quite loudly. "That wretched beast drama draws nigh." But we paid no attention. She moved my hand from her waist to her breast, and I felt cautiously, my fingers moving slowly under her shirt but over her bra, tracing the outline of her breasts and then cupping one in my hand, squeezing softly. "You're good at that," she whispered. Her lips never left mine as she spoke. We moved together, my body between her legs. "This is so fun, but I'm so sleepy. To be continued?" She kissed me for another moment, my mouth straining to stay near hers, but then she moved from beneath me, placed her head on my chest, and fell asleep instantly. We didn't have sex. We never got naked. I never touched her bare breast, and her hands never got lower than my hips. It's editing Kaylee again. See, I wasn't gone for very long. In this frequently asked questions that I was able to find on johngreenbooks.com, John Green is asked about that scene, and he says, "The scene in Looking for Alaska between Laura and Pudge takes place immediately before a far less sexually intimate, but far more emotionally intimate encounter between Pudge and Alaska. The language in the oral sex scene is extremely clinical and distant and unsensual. The word penis is used rather than member or hot rod or whatever else you'll find in romance novels. The adverbs and adjectives that appear in that scene include weird, nervous, and quizzically. This is in very stark contrast to the scene where Pudge and Alaska kiss a few pages later. There's a lot more evoking of the senses in that paragraph, some might argue too much, and it's much sexier and more passionate than the language used to describe the blowjob. I wanted these two scenes to present a dramatic contrast because I wanted it to be clear that, 1, Pudge and Laura were curious about each other and interested in exploring, but not really that passionate about each other, whereas 2, Alaska and Pudge were clearly very passionate and caring and attentive in the way that they kiss. And most importantly, that 3, physical intimacy isn't and can never be an effective substitute for emotional intimacy. It seemed to me pretty obvious that I was arguing against vapid sexual encounters in which no one has any fun and celebrating the underappreciated virtues of super hot kissing in which everyone keeps their clothes on. Some censors clearly feel otherwise, although most of them never read the blowjob scene in context, which is why I chose to read it to you in full context today. So with all of that information, with the intent and the understanding and hearing everything that I just read, if you chose to listen to it, what are your thoughts on that? Is that too much? Again, keeping in mind that these are 16-year-olds, right? I don't know. It's just interesting food for thought. Hey, also, actually, while I'm here, heads up. If this is a new book to you, if you have never read or if you don't know what is about to happen, I would like to just emotionally give you a heads up that it is about to get very, very sad very, very fast. And I am going to be crying. Heads up. Love you guys. Bye. It didn't matter. As she slept, I whispered, "I love you, Alaska Young." Just as I was falling asleep, the colonel spoke. "Dude, did you just make out with Alaska?" "Yeah. This is going to end poorly," he said to himself. And then I was asleep. That deep, can still taste her in my mouth sleep. That sleep that is not particularly restful, but is difficult to wake up from all the same. And then I heard the phone ring, I think. And then I think, although I can't know, that I felt Alaska get up. I think I heard her leave, I think. How long was she gone is impossible to know. The colonel and I both woke up when she returned, whenever that was, because she slammed the door. She was sobbing like that post-Thanksgiving morning, but worse. "I have to get out of here," she cried. "What's wrong?" "I forgot. God, how many times can I f up?" she said. I didn't have time to wonder what she forgot because she screamed, "I just have to go. Help me get out of here." "Where do you need to go?" She sat down and put her head between her legs, sobbing. "Just please distract the eagle right now so I can go, please." The colonel and I, at the same moment, equal in our guilt, said, "Okay." "Just don't turn on your lights," the colonel said. "Just drive slow and don't turn on your lights. Are you sure you're okay?" "Just get rid of the eagle for me," she said, her sobs childlike half screams. "God, oh God, I'm so sorry." "Okay," the colonel said. "Start the car when you hear the second string." We left. We did not say, "Don't drive, you're drunk." We did not say, "We aren't letting you in that car when you're upset." We did not say, "We insist on going with you." We did not say, "This can wait until tomorrow." Anything, everything can wait. We walked to our bathroom, grabbed the 3 strings of leftover firecrackers from beneath the sink, and ran to the eagles. We weren't sure that it would work again, but it worked well enough. The eagle tore out of his house as soon as the first string of firecrackers started popping. He was waiting for us, I suppose, and we headed for the woods. And we got him in deeply enough that he never heard her drive away. The colonel and I doubled back, wading through the creek to save time, slipped through the back window of room 43, and slept like babies. The eagle wakes Miles and Chip up and tells them that they need to go to the gym because something terrible has happened. Chip guesses that the old man, Dr. Hyde, died, and that the staff is going to deliver the news to the student body, but in the gym, the old man appears, but Miles cannot find Alaska. The eagle walked up to the podium and said, "Is everyone here?" "No, Alaska's not here." The eagle looked down. "Is everyone else here?" "Alaska isn't here." "Okay, Miles. Thank you. We can't start without Alaska." The eagle looked at me. He was crying noiselessly. Tears just rolled from his eyes to his chin and then fell onto his corduroy pants. He stared at me, but it was not the look of doom. His eyes blinking the tears down his face. The eagle looked, for all the world, sorry. "Please, sir, can we please wait for Alaska?" I felt all of them staring at us, trying to understand what I knew but didn't quite believe. The eagle looked down and bit his lower lip. "Last night, Alaska Young was in a terrible accident." His tears came faster then, and she was killed. Alaska has passed away. For a moment, everyone in the gym was silent, and the place had never been so quiet. Not even in the moments before the colonel ridiculed opponents at the free throw stripe. I stared down at the back of the colonel's head. I just stared, looking at his thick, bushy hair. For a moment, it was so quiet that you could hear the sound of not breathing. The vacuum created by 190 students shocked out of air. I thought, it's all my fault. I thought, I don't feel very good. I thought, I'm going to throw up. He stands up, runs outside, is very upset with himself because I knew she was drunk. Obviously, you don't let someone drive drunk and pissed off, obviously. And Christ, Miles, what the hell is wrong with you? And then comes the puke, finally splashing into the trash. And here is whatever of her I had left in my mouth, here in this trash can. Oh my God. I don't think I ever registered that line before. And then here comes the puke, finally splashing onto the trash. And here is whatever of her I had left in my mouth, here in this trash can. And then it comes again more. And then, okay, calm down. Okay, seriously, she's not dead. She's not dead. She's alive. She's alive somewhere. She's in the woods. Alaska's hiding in the woods, and she's not dead. She's just hiding. She's playing a trick on us. This is just an Alaska Young prank extraordinaire. It's Alaska being Alaska, funny and playful and not knowing when or how to put on the brakes. And then I felt much better because she had not died at all. He goes back inside of the gym. Everybody's crying. And the colonel is screaming, "I'm so sorry." Madame O'Malley grabbed his hand. "You've got nothing to be sorry for, Chip. There was nothing you could have done." But if only she knew. And I stood there, looking at the scene, thinking about her not dead, and I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around to see the eagle. And I said, "I think she's playing a dumb prank." And he said, "No, Miles, I'm sorry." And I felt the heat of my cheeks and said, "She's really good. She could pull this off." And he said, "I saw her. I'm sorry." Miles asks what happened. Somebody was setting off firecrackers in the woods. I went out after them, but I guess she drove off campus. It was late. She was on I-65 just south of downtown. A truck had jackknifed, blocking both lanes. A police car had just gotten to the scene. She hit the cruiser without ever swerving. I believe she must have been very intoxicated. The police said that they smelled alcohol. How do you know? I saw her, Miles. I talked to the police. It was instant. The steering wheel hit her chest. I'm so sorry. And I said, "You saw her?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How did she look?" And he said, "Just a bit of blood coming out of her nose." And I sat down on the floor of the gym. I could hear the colonel still screaming, and I could feel hands on my back as I hunched forward, but I could only see her lying naked on the metal table, a small trickle of blood falling out of her half-teardrop nose. Her green eyes open, staring off into the distance. Her mouth turned up just enough to suggest the idea of a smile, and she had felt so warm against me. Her mouth soft and warm on mine. The colonel and I are walking back to our dorm room in silence, and I'm staring at the ground beneath me. I cannot stop thinking that she is dead, and I cannot stop thinking that she cannot possibly be dead. People do not just die. I can't catch my breath. I feel afraid, like someone has told me that they're going to kick my ass after school. And now it's 6th period, and I know full well what's coming. It is too cold today, literally freezing, and I imagine running to the creek and diving in head first. The creek so shallow that my hands scrape against the rocks and my body slides into the cold water. The shock of the cold giving way to numbness, and I would stay there. Float down with that water, first to the Cahaba River, then to the Alabama River, to Mobile Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. I want to melt into the brown, crunchy grass that the colonel and I step on as we silently make our way back to our room. His feet are so large, too large for his short body, and the new generic tennis shoes he wears since his old ones were piston look almost like clown shoes. I think of Alaska's flip-flops clinging to her blue toes as we swung on the swing down by the lake. Will the casket be open? Can a mortician recreate her smile? Oh my God. I could still hear her saying it. This is so fun, but I'm so sleepy. To be continued? 19th century preacher Henry Ward Beecher's last words were, "Now comes the mystery." The poet Dylan Thomas, who liked a good drink at least as much as Alaska, said, "I've had 18 straight whiskeys. I do believe that's a record," before dying. Alaska's favorite was playwright Eugene O'Neill, born in a hotel room and goddamn it died in a hotel room. Even car accident victims sometimes have time for last words. Princess Diana said, "Oh God, what's happened?" Movie star James Dean said, "They've got to see us," just before slamming his Porsche into another car. I know so many last words, but I will never know hers. I am several steps in front of him before I realize that the colonel has fallen down. I turn around and he is lying on his face. "We have to get up, Chip. We have to get up. We have to just get to the room." The colonel turns his face from the ground to me and looks me dead in the eye and says, "I can't breathe." But he can breathe, and I know this because he is hyperventilating, breathing as if trying to blow air back into the dead. I pick him up, and he grabs onto me and starts sobbing again, saying, "I'm so sorry," over and over again. We have never hugged before, me and the colonel, and there's nothing much to say because he ought to be sorry. And as I put my hand on the back of his head and say the only one true thing, I'm sorry too. So, my issue that I have... Are you okay? Let me touch base, actually. I knew that was coming, but if this is the first time that you've heard that story, you probably didn't. So, I'm sorry. I would love to say that it gets better, but now this after section is coping with the loss of Alaska and some realizations and coming to terms with the idea of your friend dying. I had to take a break for a little bit. So now that I'm back, it's my birthday. I can cry if I want to. I can talk about whatever I want to. So I read Looking for Alaska when I was 13 years old. And at the time, I related so heavily to Alaska. I loved poetry. I loved reading. I was depressed. I carried a lot of guilt for things that also happened to me at 8 years old, or that, 10, 12, when I was younger, that these like tragic things would happen in my life, and I carried that guilt with me. And so when I read Looking for Alaska, it was trippy reading about somebody who felt the same things that I did. Right at that age, everything feels so new, and you feel and you think like you're the only one that has ever experienced those feelings. And it's the first time that you've ever experienced them in your life, and so it feels so extreme. It was so cool. And I remember reading it and thinking how cool Alaska was and how much I wanted to be like her. Not in the sense of, it's not like I read this and then I went out and like did drugs and smoked and drank and all this other stuff. Like I was very straight edge through high school and everything. But I wanted that confidence that she had and the way that she talked to people so not nonchalantly because she was emotional, but just that like air of confidence and the way that she carried herself around people, I thought was so cool. It wasn't when I was 13 that I was having the conversations and that I talked like Alaska did, but there was definitely a time in my life when I was like 16, 17 that I talked the way that she did and talked so nonchalantly about, like sex and adult content and things like that, which I think most 16, 17-year-olds do, right? Like, let's all not turn a blind eye to it. Like, it is what it is. That happens, and those are conversations. And if you think it doesn't, then you just don't remember being 16. You know what I mean? And I say that to say, I don't think any of the conversations and the commentary that she had was unbelievable. The way that she talked to Miles, this, like, kind of, and it's not teasing him. It's just this, like, seeking comfort from somebody, right? This need for feeling wanted and feeling comforted, that when you're a teenager and there is this, like, desire to just, like, feel validation when you feel like such shit, even as an adult, that you seek comfort where you can. I don't think that that is unbelievable. I don't think that's unbelievably written. Him thirsting over her and describing her in such a way, I don't think is unbelievably written. Hello, you know the drill by now. As I'm editing this, I'm realizing that there's a couple other things that I wanted to make comments on that I don't think I conveyed in a way that I'm happy with. I'm going back to Goodreads at this point, and I'm fighting off those 1 stars. The comments there were that she was overly sexualized, and what I'm saying is I disagree. I think the explicit scenes that I just read to you, I don't think were excessive. I don't think that it was inappropriate or like inappropriate for that age group if it is like fellow, teenagers, late teenagers reading it. Again, we're back to this whole manic pixie dream girl argument that I'll read the article later, but anybody who DNF'd this book in the first 10 to 15%, honestly, if you didn't get to the middle part of this book, I completely understand. No, I don't, but sure, I completely understand why you would give this book a 1 or 2 stars and why you would make those arguments. But if you are not going to read the book in its entirety to understand who Alaska Young really is, then shut the fuck up, is all I really have to say about it. And same thing with those explicit scenes. They take it out of context, as John Green said in the bit that I read earlier from him. It's the same thing with calling Alaska Young a manic pixie dream girl or over-sexualized or whatever, is you are either very much in denial of the way that 16 and 17-year-olds talk and act, and or you are in very strong denial of reading comprehension and just not giving a book a chance and reading it through its entirety. That's all. If you've gotten to this point in the book and you still have that opinion, give it time. He comes to his own terms. Yes, in the beginning, Miles treats her as that. Like, she is treated as, like, such a shallow female character, and that is how he views her, until the second half of the fucking book, where he realizes that that's not a cool way to think about things. I don't know, dude. I remember being 13 and reading and relating so heavily to her, to such a level, and then for her to die just hit me so hard in such a way that I could not pick up the book again. I would say it was my favorite for years afterward. I would paint my nails blue for like 3 months after I read it, but I would not be able to touch that book again until 15 years later when I reread it for this channel. It just sat on my bookshelf. Like, you can see, it's just like, it still looks pristine even though I bought this in 2009. So I will finish this book. We'll go ahead and try and knock out the rest of this book tonight, and then I will read you the rest of that article, and we'll see how we're feeling. 2 days after, Miles calls his parents to tell them about Alaska's death. They sympathize with him and ask if he wants to come home. He says no, he wants to be at school, and he returns to his room to find Chip memorizing country capitals. Chip is visibly upset, grabs his almanac, and tells Miles that he's going for a walk. Friends, including Laura, come by to check in on Miles, but Miles wants to be alone. He has a nightmare about Alaska and wakes up wishing that Chip would return from his walk. So 4 days after, the Colonel returns from his walk. He walked 42 miles. 42 there, 42 back. 84 miles in 45 hours. Miles is like, "You didn't sleep?" He says, "No, the dreams are terrible. In my dreams, she doesn't even look like herself anymore. I don't even remember what she looked like. I was so tired of her getting upset for no reason. The way that she would get sulky and make references to the freaking oppressive weight of tragedy or whatever, but then never said what was wrong. Never had any goddamn reason to be sad. And I just think you ought to have a reason. My girlfriend dumped me, so I'm sad. I got caught smoking, so I'm pissed off. My head hurts, so I'm cranky. She never had a reason, Pudge. I was just so tired of putting up with her drama, and I just let her go. Christ." Her moodiness had annoyed me too sometimes, but not that night. That night, I let her go because she told me to. It was that simple for me, and that's stupid. The Colonel's hand was so little, and I grabbed it tight, his cold seeping into me, my warmth into him. I memorized the populations. So the Colonel, right, we know he's the state. He remembered all the states and the capitals, and then he learned on to learn the country capitals, and then now populations. And it's just this like coping mechanism for this really smart kid to deal with his thoughts, and it makes me so sad to think about. 6 days after, Miles, Chip, Takumi, and Laura drive together to Alaska's funeral in her hometown, Vine Station. They take back roads to avoid the spot on the highway where Alaska died, and Miles reflects on the pain that he feels from loving someone and having to live on after that person dies. They enter the funeral home and meet Alaska's father, and Miles mourns that he will not see Alaska again because the casket is closed. She wasn't even a person anymore, just flesh rotting, but I loved her present tense. The Colonel knelt down beside me and put his lips to the coffin and whispered, "I'm sorry, Alaska. You deserved a better friend." 7 days after, Miles refuses to eat, and Chip goes to the cafeteria without him. When Chip returns, he reports that the Eagle ate with him and asked if he and Miles were responsible for setting off the fireworks that helped Alaska sneak away, and Chip assures Miles that he did not confess. He also says that Alaska's aunt plans to clean out Alaska's room, so they need to go in there and get anything that they want if they want to keep any mementos of her. So they go through her room and look at her library, trying to pick out mementos, and the only thing that Miles wants is her copy of The General in His Labyrinth. Chip finds it, hands it over to Miles. The places she'd underlined and the little notes she'd written had all been blurred out by the soaking, but the book was still mostly readable. Her room had flooded earlier, like part of the Weekend Warriors. One of their pranks that they did back was flooding her room, so a lot of her books got ruined. It was a whole thing. But that also means that that book got damaged. The places that she had underlined and the little notes that she had written had all been blurred out by the soaking, but the book was still mostly readable. And I was thinking I could take it back to my room and try to read it, even though it wasn't a biography, when I flipped to that page toward the back. He was shaken by the overwhelming revelation that the headlong race between his misfortunes and his dreams was, at that moment, reaching the finish line. The rest was darkness. "Damn it," he sighed. "How will I ever get out of this labyrinth?" The whole passage was underlined in bleeding, water-soaked black ink, but there was another ink. This one, a crisp blue post-flood, and an arrow led from "How will I ever get out of this labyrinth" to a margin note written in her loop-heavy cursive, "Straight and fast." So the boys look at this, straight and fast to get out of the labyrinth, and they start to question if it was an accident, if the car accident was truly an accident, or if that's how she got out of the labyrinth, was straight and fast. 8 days after, Culver Creek classes resume, and the old man, Dr. Hyde, explains that he understands that the content of his religion class has likely become personal because of Alaska's death. He shuffled through the exams, pulling one out from the pile before him. I have here Alaska's final. You'll recall that you were asked what the most important question facing people is and how the 3 traditions we're studying this year address that question. This was Alaska's question. With a sigh, he grabbed a hold of his chair and lifted himself out of it, then wrote on the blackboard, "How will we ever get out of this labyrinth of suffering?" "I'm going to leave that up for the rest of the semester," he said, "because everybody who has ever lost their way in life has felt the nagging insistence of that question. At some point, we all look up and realize that we are lost in a maze, and I don't want us to forget Alaska. And I don't want to forget that even when the material we are studying seems boring, we are trying to understand how people have answered that question, and the questions each of you posed in your papers, how different traditions have come to terms with what Chip, in his final, called people's rotten lots in life." They go on to go through the day, and after class, a couple of people approach them and say that how much they miss Alaska, and they start crying about it, and Chip and Miles are very upset, because they're like, they didn't love her like we loved her. Like, they weren't close to her. They don't even give a shit. Like, why are they even sad? And Miles is like, well, wouldn't you be sad if that girl died? I thought everyone else had a better excuse to grieve than we did. After all, they hadn't killed her. But I knew better than to try to talk to Colonel when he was mad. 9 days after, Chip stays in the dorm and plays video games instead of going to class, and when Miles returns, Chip tells him that he has a theory about Alaska unaliving herself. So listen, she kisses you. That night, someone calls. Jake, I imagine. They have a fight about cheating or about something else, who knows. So she's upset. She wants to go and see him. She comes back to the room crying and tells us she has to go off campus. And she's freaked out because, I don't know, let's say if she can't go visit him, Jake will break up with her. That's just a hypothetical reason. So she gets off campus, drunk and all pissed off. She's furious at herself for whatever it is, and she's driving along and sees a cop car, and then in a flash, everything comes together, and the end of her labyrinthian mystery is staring right in her face, and she just does it. Straight and fast, just aims at the cop car and never swerves, not because she's drunk, but because she killed herself. That's ridiculous. She wasn't thinking about Jake or fighting with Jake. She was making out with me. I tried to bring up the whole Jake thing, and she just shushed me. So who called her? I don't know, I yelled as I smashed my hand against the wall with each syllable. And you know what? It doesn't matter. She's dead. Is the brilliant Colonel going to figure out something that's going to make her less freaking dead? Maybe she was just driving there to break up with Jake. I don't know. I don't really want to know. Yeah, well, I want to know. Because if she knew what she was doing, Pudge, she made us accomplices. And I hate her for that. I mean, God, look at us. We can't even talk to anyone anymore. Listen, I wrote out a game plan. 1, talk to eyewitnesses. 2, figure out how drunk she was. And 3, figure out where she was going and why. I don't want to talk to Jake. If he knows, I definitely don't want to talk to him, and he doesn't. And if he doesn't, I don't want to pretend like it didn't happen. The Colonel stood up and sighed. You know what, Pudge? I feel bad for you. I do. I know you kissed her, and I know you're broken about it, but honestly, shut up. If Jake knows, you're not going to make it any worse, and if he doesn't, he won't find out. So just stop worrying about your goddamn self for 1 minute and think about your dead friend. Sorry. Long day. It's fine, I said, pulling the covers back over my head. It's fine, I repeated. And whatever, it was fine. It had to be. I couldn't afford to lose the Colonel. Oh my gosh. 13 days after, they go to the police department to ask about how she died, and they interview the police officer who was at the crash. And he says that the cruiser had the lights and sirens going, and she didn't swerve. She didn't brake. It was like full steam ahead. And by the time that he got to the car, she was already dead. That means that Miles gives up hope about ever knowing her last words. Which is so sad. And the police officer also feels guilty for not moving his car. Which is also like such a horrible thing. You know, they ask for a little bit more information, and they find out that her blood alcohol level was 0.24, and that there were white tulips scattered all over her car. The Colonel, Chip, he leaves even more convinced that Alaska did this on purpose, and Miles wants to stop investigating, but he also can't not help Chip. 14 days after, they are looking into signs of unaliving yourself. And they said that Alaska only exhibited 2 of the 13 possible warning signs. And they, again, have this entire argument about her driving off of campus. And, like, if she wanted to unalive herself, why would she go and drive? Like, why would she do it that way? Miles says This is only making me hate her, and I don't want to hate her. What's the point? If that's all it's making me do. The point is that there are always answers, Pudge. There are always answers. We just have to be smart enough. The web says that unalivings usually involve carefully thought out plans, so clearly she didn't do that. Okay, fine. It wasn't unaliving herself, although it sure doesn't make sense as an accident. We're sure making progress. On day 20, they kind of come to a head where the colonel is saying, hey, dude, you need to call Jake and figure out if they fought or something. Like, we're not making any progress. And Miles keeps trying to refuse. And finally, the colonel snaps and he says, you don't even care about her. All that matters is you and your precious fucking fantasy that you and Alaska had this goddamn secret love affair and she was going to leave Jake for you. And you'd happily live ever after. But she kissed a lot of guys, Pudge. And if she were here, we both know that she would still be Jake's girlfriend and that there'd be nothing but drama between the two of you. Not love, not sex, just you pining after her and her like, you're cute, Pudge, but I love Jake. If she loved you so much, why did she leave you that night? Oh my god. And if you loved her so much, why did you help her go? I was drunk. What's your excuse? Oh my god. So then he has a little bit of a breakdown. He goes out to the smoke pit. He's throwing stuff around and thinking, like, did she love me? Would she have left Jake for me? Or was it just another impulsive Alaska moment? It was not enough to be the last guy she kissed. I wanted to be the last one that she loved, and I knew I wasn't. I knew it, and I hated her for it. I hated her for not caring about me. I hated her for leaving that night, and I hated myself too. Not only because I let her go, but because if I had been enough for her, she wouldn't have even wanted to leave. She would have just lain in bed with me and talked and cried, and I would have listened and kissed her tears as they pooled in her eyes. I wondered if there would ever be a day when I didn't think about Alaska. Wondered whether I should hope for a time when she would be a distant memory. Recalled only on the anniversary of her death, or maybe a couple of weeks after, remembering only after having forgotten. I knew that I would know more dead people. The bodies pile up. Could there be space in my memory for each of them? Or would I forget a little of Alaska every day for the rest of my life? So then he goes out to the creek and he has a memory of Alaska and him being there earlier in the year, and he starts to think to himself, she taught me everything I knew about crawfish and kissing and pink wine and poetry. She made me different. I lit a cigarette and spit into the creek. You can't just make me different and then leave, I said out loud to her, because I was fine before, Alaska. I was fine with just me and my last words and school friends, and you can't just make me different and then die. For she had embodied the great perhaps. She had proved to me that it was worth it to leave behind my minor life for grander maybes, and now she was gone with her, my faith in perhaps. I could call everything the colonel said and did fine. I could try to pretend that I didn't care anymore, but it could never be true again. You can't just make yourself matter and then die, Alaska, because now I'm here irretrievably different. And I'm sorry I let you go, yes, but you made the choice. You left me perhapsless, stuck in your goddamn labyrinth, and now I don't even know if you chose the straight and fast way out, if you left me like this on purpose. And so I never knew you, did I? I can't remember because I never knew. And as I stood up to walk home and make my peace with the colonel, I tried to imagine her in that chair, but I could not remember whether she crossed her legs. I could still see her smiling at me with half a Mona Lisa's smirk, but I couldn't picture her hands well enough to see her holding a cigarette. I decided, to really know her, because I needed more to remember. Before I could begin the shameful process of forgetting the how and the why of her living and dying, I needed to learn it. How, why, when, where, what. 21 days after, Dr. Hyde is in class, and they are talking more about heaven and hell and reincarnation. As much as I wanted to know how Alaska had died, I wanted to know where she was now, if anywhere. I liked to imagine her looking down on us, still aware of us, but it seemed like a fantasy, and I never really felt it, just as the colonel had said at the funeral, that she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. I couldn't honestly imagine her as anything but dead, her body rotting in Vine Station, the rest of her as a ghost alive only in our remembering. After class, he and Takumi talk for the first time in a while, and Takumi is also saying that he misses her, and that asks if he is still dating Laura, and he's not. He really hasn't been talking to her either. 27 days after, Chip announces to Miles that they need alcohol and the Eagles' breathalyzer. And then Takumi overhears this plan, so then he joins. And so the three boys are in there. drinking alcohol to try and get to that 0.24 blood level to see what it feels like. And Chip determines that based on his ability to react and go through these tests they're having, that Alaska would have been aware enough to at least swerve around the police car. But he also observes that she could have fallen asleep. 29 days after, Chip calls Jake to ask about the night that Alaska died while Miles and Takumi smoke. And then Chip plays a prank on them, pretending to be the eagle, like busting them for smoking, but they didn't have a fight. He recalls their conversation that they were just talking about their anniversary and if she liked the flowers that he got her, and that she was doodling on the wall, or she said that she was doodling flowers on the wall, and then just randomly said, "Oh my God," and then hung up, freaking out, and then that's when she would have gone in and talked to the boys. So she tells me to be continued and tells him that she'll talk to him later. Yes, noted, planning for a future, admittedly inconsistent with unaliving herself. So then she comes back into her room screaming about forgetting something, and then her headlong race comes to an end. So that answers nothing, really. Well, we know where she was going, unless she was feeling particularly impulsive, Takumi says, and from the sound of things, she was feeling rather impulsive that night. That's the great question. How do you go from normal to freaking out, and where was she really going if her and Jake were fine? If it wasn't impulsiveness, what is it that she would have been doing? It's 37 days later, and he says his first 2 words to Laura in the entirety of that 37 days, and it's, "I'm sorry." And she is understandably angry at him. She lost her best friend, not her best friend maybe, but she lost a friend of hers, and then lost her boyfriend kind of in like one fell swoop, and her boyfriend's just obsessed with this dead friend now, right? Kind of a crappy position for her to be in. 45 days later, the boys don't do very well on a math test, and they say that it's because they don't have Alaska there to tutor them. And then they go and pick up cigarettes. Nothing really too crazy there. Go to that Kusa liquor store to go and pick up cigarettes. And it's really just them going through the motions and getting back to like a normal routine, right? So a lot of the second half, just them getting back into the whole smoking and drinking and hanging out and being buddies stuff, which is great, right? They're overcoming this level of grief. In 46 days after, Takumi finally convinces Miles to talk to Laura and acknowledge that everybody else actually has feelings also about Alaska's death, right? And that all of the other friends have also been mourning, and it's kind of shitty that Miles and Chip have just locked themselves away to be the only ones and act like they're the only ones feeling it. The 4 of them, Chip, Miles, Takumi, and Laura, go to the smoking hole, and they have a little bit more discussion about like where they stand with figuring out what happened with Alaska. The colonel says, "We have to find out where she was going. The last people to talk to her were me, you, and Jake," I said to him, "and we don't know. How the hell are we going to find out?" Takumi looked over at the colonel and sighed. "I don't think it would help to know where she was going. I think that it would make it worse for us. Just a gut feeling." "Well, my gut wants to know," Laura said. I realized what Takumi meant the other day when we were together. I may have kissed her, but I didn't really have a monopoly on Alaska. The colonel and I weren't the only ones who cared about her and weren't alone in trying to figure out how she died and why. 51 days later, the investigation has stalled, but he's reflecting in Dr. Hyde's class and reflecting on this, like the lessons of Buddhism and things falling apart and the cells and the organisms coming back together and this energy and blah, blah, blah. We are all going, I thought, and it applies to turtles, turtlenecks, Alaska, the girl, and Alaska, the place, because nothing can last, not even the earth itself. The Buddha said that suffering was caused by desire. We'd learned that the cessation of desire meant cessation of suffering. When you stopped wishing things wouldn't fall apart, you stopped suffering when they did. Someday, no one will remember that she ever existed, I wrote in my notebook, or that I did. Because memories fall apart too, and then you're left with nothing. Left not even with a ghost, but with its shadow. In the beginning, she had haunted me, haunted my dreams, but even now, just weeks later, she was slipping away, falling apart in my memory, and everyone else's, dying again. It's 62 days later, and Miles gets a phone call from his mom. He's on the payphone with her when he's looking at the doodling on the wall, and he finds the flower that she doodled when she was having the conversation with Jake. And so they're saying, okay, so his running theory then is that she was on the phone with Jake, she saw the flowers, freaked out, and then when they went to get the fireworks, she went to get the tulips, and then got in her car and then went to God knows where. So they're like, okay, it's a good theory, but like, we still don't know what she forgot. Like, we don't know what she forgot or what she remembered or anything like that. 69 days after, the great prank, right? They had the pre-prank that they did, and then they decided that it is time to honor Alaska's last thing. And it ends up being that they hire a male stripper. Their parents are in on it and disguise it as being a like professor from the university that's going to come out and talk about X, Y, and Z. Yeah, it'll be Dr. William Morse will be the speaker for the annual school-wide speaker day, and Miles's father agrees to the plan, saying that he's a professor, that Dr. Williams Morse, a psychology professor and expert on adolescent sexuality, and that he'll come out there and do a speech. In the middle of this, like, pretend speech, and Laura says, "Take your clothes off, you're so hot, you should, like, shut up and take your clothes off." And cue the music playing and everything happening, and it's hilarious, right? It's good times, it's well done, it makes me want to cry. And the eagle doesn't really punish them for it. He just said, "I know it was y'all. Don't ever do anything like that again, but Lord, subverting the patriarchal paradigm, it's like she wrote the speech." That's what the stripper had said during the during the speech at the beginning. 114 days after, Takumi comes into Miles's room and he asks if he remembers January 10th, asks if it rings a bell. Yeah, it's the day Alaska died. Technically, she died 3 hours into January 11th, but it was still, to us anyway, Monday night, January 10th. Yeah, but something else, Pudge. January 9th, Alaska's mom took her to the zoo. Wait, how do you know that? She told us at the bar night, remember? Of course I didn't remember. If I could remember numbers, I wouldn't have been struggling toward a C+ in pre-calc. Holy shit, I said as the colonel walked in. January 9th, 1997, Alaska liked the bears, her mom liked the monkeys. The colonel looked at me blankly for a moment and then took his backpack off, slung it across the room in a single motion. Holy shit, why the hell didn't I think of that? Within a minute, the colonel had the best solution either of us would ever come up with. Okay, she's sleeping. Jake calls and she talks to him and she's doodling and she looks at her white flower and, oh my god, my mom liked white flowers and put them in my hair when I was little. And then she flips out. She comes back to her room and starts screaming at us that she forgot about her mom. So she takes her the flowers, drives off campus on her way to what? Her mom's grave? Yeah, probably, yeah. She gets into the car and just wants to get to her mom's grave, but it's the jackknife truck and the cops are there and she's drunk and pissed off and she's in a hurry, so she thinks she can squeeze past the cop car, and she's not even thinking straight, but she has to get to her mom. And she thinks she can get past it somehow and poof. Or, Takumi says, she gets into the car with the flowers, but she's already missed the anniversary. She's probably thinking she screwed things up with her mom again. First she doesn't call 911, and now she can't even remember the freaking anniversary. And she's furious, and she hates herself, and she decides that's it. She sees the cop car, and there's her chance, and she just floors it. 118 days after, they gave up. I'd finally had enough of chasing after a ghost who didn't want to be discovered. We'd failed, maybe, but some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. I still did not know her as I wanted to, but I never could. She made it impossible for me. And the accident would never be anything else. And I was left to ask, did I help you toward a fate you didn't want, Alaska, or did I just assist you in your willful self-destruction? Because they are different crimes, and I didn't know whether to feel angry at her for making me part of her side, or just to feel angry at myself for letting her go. But we knew it could be found out, and in finding it out, she made us closer. The Colonel and Takumi and me, anyway. And that was it. She didn't leave me enough to discover her, but she left me enough to rediscover the great perhaps. So the boys decide that they're going to drive out to where Alaska died, that this is their last thing to kind of let go of the situation, is to finally drive on the highway where she died. And on the way out there, an ambulance, lights and sirens blaring, sped past us, going in the opposite direction towards school, and for an instant I felt a nervous excitement and thought it could be someone I know. I almost wished it was someone I knew to give a new form and depth to the sadness that I still felt. The silence broke. Sometimes I liked it. Sometimes I liked it that she was dead. You mean it felt good? No, I don't know. It felt pure. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Me too. It's natural. I mean, it must be natural. It always shocked me when I realized that I wasn't the only person in the world who thought and felt such strange and awful things. They drive through the spot where she had died, and they get off at the next exit quietly, and switching drivers, we walked in front of the car we met, and I held the Colonel. My hands balled into fists around his shoulders, and he wrapped his short arms around me and squeezed tight so that I felt the heaves of his chest as we realized over and over again that we were still alive. I realized it in the waves that we had held on to each other crying, and I thought, God, we must look so lame. But it doesn't much matter when you have just now realized all that time later that you are still alive. 119 days later, they are just focusing back into school. It's nearing the end of the semester, and he and the colonel are just grinding away. 102 days after, they're in Dr. Hyde's class. I have your final exam. Last semester, I gave you nearly 2 months to complete your final paper. This time, you get 2 weeks. Well, nothing to be done about that, I guess, he laughed. To be honest, I just decided once and for all to use this paper topic last night. It goes rather against my nature. Anyway, pass these around. The question is, how will you personally, ever get out of this labyrinth of suffering? Now that you've wrestled with 3 major religious traditions, apply your newly enlightened mind to Alaska's question. You need not specifically discuss the perspectives of different religions in your essay. No research is necessary. Your knowledge or lack thereof has been established in the quizzes you've taken this semester. I am interested in how you're able to fit the untestable fact of suffering into your understanding of the world and how you navigate through life in spite of it. They go back to their dorm, and he and the colonel are talking. So how will we ever get out of this labyrinth, Colonel? If only I knew. That's probably not going to get you an A. It also doesn't do much to put my soul to rest. Or hers, I said. Right, I had forgotten about her. He shook his head. That keeps happening. Well, you have to write something, I argued. After all this time, it still seems to me like straight and fast is the only way out. But I choose the labyrinth. The labyrinth blows, but I choose it. We're in the very last chapter of the book, and I'm just going to read you it in its entirety. 136 days after, 2 weeks later, I still hadn't finished my final for the old man, and the semester was 24 hours from ending. I was walking home from my final test, a difficult but ultimately, I hoped, successful battle with pre-calculus that would win me the B- I so richly desired. It was genuinely hot outside again, warm like she was, and I felt okay. Tomorrow my parents would come and load up my stuff, and we would watch graduation and then go back to Florida. The colonel was going home to his mother to spend the summer watching the soybeans grow, but I could call him long distance, so we would be in touch plenty. Takumi was going to Japan for the summer, and Laura was going to be driven via green limo back to her house. I was just thinking that it was all right not to know quite where Alaska was and quite where she was going that night when I opened the door to my room and noticed a folded slip of paper on the linoleum floor. It was a single piece of lime green stationery. At the top, it read in calligraphy, "From the desk of Takumi, to Pudge/Colonel. I am sorry that I have not talked to you before. I am not staying for graduation. I leave for Japan tomorrow morning. For a long time I was mad at you. The way that you cut me out of everything hurt me, and so I kept what I knew to myself. But then, even after I wasn't mad anymore, I still didn't say anything, and I don't even really know why. Pudge had that kiss, I guess, and I had this secret. You've mostly figured this out, but the truth is that I saw her that night. I stayed up late with Laura and some people, and when I was falling asleep, I heard Alaska crying outside my back window. It was like 3:15 that morning, maybe, and I walked out there and I saw her walking through the soccer field. I tried to talk to her, but she was in a hurry. She told me that her mother was dead 8 years that day, and that she always put flowers on her mother's grave on the anniversary, but she forgot that year. She was out there looking for flowers, but it was too early, too wintry. That's how I knew about January 10th. I still have no idea whether it was a suicide, whether she was so sad, and I didn't know what to do or say. I think she counted on me to be the one person who would always say or do the right things to help her, but I couldn't. I just thought she was looking for flowers. I didn't know she was going to go. She was drunk, just trashed drunk, and I really didn't think she would drive or anything. I thought she would just cry herself to sleep and then drive to visit her mom the next day or something. She walked away, and then I heard a car start. I don't know what I was thinking. So I let her go too, and I'm sorry. I know you loved her. It was hard not to. He tries to run after Takumi, but he was gone. His dorm room empty, and I didn't have time to tell him what I had just now realized, that I forgave him, that she forgave us, and that we had to forgive to survive in the labyrinth. There are so many of us who would have to live with things done and things left undone that day, things that did not go right, things that seemed okay at the time because we could not see the future. If only we could see the endless strings of consequences that result from our smallest actions. But we can't know better until knowing better is useless. And as I walked back to give Takumi's note to the colonel, I saw that I would never know. I would never know her well enough to know her thoughts in those last minutes. I would never know if she left us on purpose. But the not knowing would not keep me from caring. I would always love Alaska Young, my crooked neighbor, with all my crooked heart. I got back to room 43, but the colonel wasn't home yet, so I left the note on the top bunk and I sat down at my computer and I wrote my way out of the labyrinth. Before I got here, I thought for a long time that the way out of the labyrinth was to pretend that it did not exist, to build a small, self-sufficient world in the back corner of the endless maze and to pretend that I was not lost but home. But that only led to a lonely life accompanied by only the last words of the already dead. So I came here looking for the great perhaps, for real friends in a more than minor life. And then I screwed up, and the colonel screwed up, and Takumi screwed up, and she slipped through our fingers. And there's no sugarcoating it. She deserved better friends. When she fucked up all those years ago, I'm just a little girl terrified into paralysis. She collapsed into the enigma of herself. And I could have done that, but I saw where it led for her. So I still believe in the great perhaps. I can believe in it in spite of having lost her. Because I will forget her, yes. That which came together will fall apart imperceptibly slowly, and I will forget, but she will forgive my forgetting just as I forgive her for forgetting me and the colonel and everyone but herself and her mom and those last moments she spent as a person. I know now that she forgives me for being dumb and scared and doing the dumb and scared thing. I know she forgives me just as her mother forgives her, and here's how I know. I thought at first that she was just dead, just darkness, just a body being eaten by bugs. I thought about her a lot like that, as something's meal. What was her green eyes, half a smirk, the soft curves of her legs, would soon be nothing, just the bones I never saw. I thought about the slow process of becoming bone and then fossil and then coal that will, in millions of years, be mined by humans of the future and how they would heat their homes with her. And then she would be smoke billowing out of a smokestack coating the atmosphere. I still think that sometimes. Think that maybe the afterlife is just something we made up to ease the pain of loss, to make our time in the labyrinth bearable. Maybe she was just matter, and matter gets recycled. But ultimately, I do not believe that she was only matter. The rest of her must be recycled too. I believe now that we are greater than the sum of our parts. If you take Alaska's genetic code, you add her life experiences, the relationships that she had with people, and then you take the size and shape of her body, you do not get her. There is something else entirely. There is a part of her greater than the sum of her knowable parts, and that part has to go somewhere, because it cannot be destroyed. Although no one will ever accuse me of being much of a science student, one thing I learned from science classes is that energy is never created and never destroyed. And if Alaska took her own life, that is the hope I wish I could have given her. Forgetting her mother, failing her mother, and her friends, and herself, those are awful things. But she did not need to fold into herself and self-destruct. Those awful things are survivable, because we are as indestructible as we believe ourselves to be. When adults say, teenagers think they are invincible with that sly, stupid smile on their faces, they don't know how right they are. We need never be hopeless because we can never be irreparably broken. We think that we are invincible because we are. We cannot be born and we cannot die. Like all energy, we can only change shapes and sizes and manifestations. They forget that when they get old. They get scared of losing and failing. But that part of us, greater than the sum of our parts, cannot begin and cannot end, and so it cannot fail. So I know she forgives me, just as I forgive her. Thomas Edison's last words were, "It's very beautiful over there." I don't know where there is, but I believe it's somewhere, and I hope it's beautiful. Yeah, that last speech always gets me. And I know, reading it now, it's cheesy, right? It's a little overplayed. But again, you have to remember that was written 15 years ago. And a lot of that stuff that's considered cliche now and that you've seen so often on the internet is, from that book. You know what I'm saying? That was one of the first, really main pulp culture stuff that had quotes like that and theories and like in themes and whatnot along those lines. And so I think people, especially 20 years later, that are reading this book don't remember or don't care to acknowledge the context of the world in which it was published in. I'll read you the rest of this article really quick. The rest of the novel in the after section is spent trying to decipher why and how Alaska died. Miles becomes obsessed with trying to know why this happened, and it's in this section of the story that to the reader it becomes clear that Alaska was more than just Miles's manic pixie dream girl. She was a person, and she had issues, and she had demons that nobody except her could resolve. Alaska had watched her mother die when she was a young girl, spent her life blaming herself for her mother's death. It's never revealed whether Alaska purposefully crashed her car or not that night. But that's the whole point. Alaska's death was not some puzzle for Miles to solve, not an event to give Miles' life purpose. Her death had absolutely nothing to do with Miles, and in turn, neither did her life. Miles romanticized Alaska's existence, saw her as an escape from his boring teenage life, but her death and circumstances surrounding it prove that Alaska would have also been Alaska, whether Miles Halter ever came to Culver Creek or not. Miles feels guilty for Alaska's death as the two of them had shared a kiss the night that she died, but this is Miles's biggest flaw. Miles is unintentionally selfish. He believes that her death had something to do with him and is angry at her for dying before she could have been the idolized version of herself that he had created in his mind. They pull the quote from the Colonel when he says that, like, all that matters to you is your precious fantasy that you had of Alaska, the secret love affair thing. And in that moment, the Colonel was painstakingly right. Alaska's entire existence had been played up inside of Miles's mind, and Miles had convinced himself that Alaska was just as much in love with him as he was her. Looking for Alaska is my favorite book of all time, and Alaska Young is one of the only female characters I actually see myself in. She lived her life the way she wanted, let herself see the beauty in existence, and despite the way she died, Alaska found purpose in life and didn't let herself fall into that character trope she so easily could have fallen into. Miles was not her savior. Her death proves that. Alaska's death proves that she was a human under Miles's idea of her, and in fact, the way that Miles saw her and thought about her was almost nothing like the real Alaska. Miles is even called out for this by other characters in the story, including Alaska herself, when she has the quote about the "don't you know who you love, Pudge? You love the girl who makes you laugh and shows you and drinks wine with you. You don't love the crazy, sullen bitch." She's telling him straight up that she knows he's convinced himself that Alaska is someone more wonderful than she actually is. And he, in his internal monologue, even agrees. Miles, as unreliable as a narrator as he is, does finally acknowledge the fact that Alaska did not think of him when she died. People will never stop calling Alaska Young a manic pixie dream girl, and some people will never stop criticizing John's Green writing of her. But I know this book like the palm of my hand, and I have loved Alaska Young for so many years. Each time I reread this book, I love Alaska a little more. Everyone around her saw her for everything she wasn't, and still, critics of this novel do as well. Alaska Young did not exist to help Miles seek his grade, perhaps. She existed for the same reason every other human on this earth exists: to breathe air, to have a heartbeat, and a personality. So I walked back to my room and collapsed on the bottom bunk, thinking that if people were rain and I was drizzle, she was a hurricane. This is how Miles described her in his mind, but also Alaska Young was not the hurricane Miles Halter so desperately wanted her to be. She wasn't anything except a girl from a broken home, a girl with guilt seeping out from within, and a girl who never asked to be someone else's escape. I don't think I could really say it better myself. I think the intention of writing should be acknowledged, and I think a lot of people who DNF the book based only in reading the beginning section don't see the character growth. I could 100% see the argument for the Manic Pixie Dream Girl part until you get to halfway through the book. And you could argue, and you're like, okay, cool, well, she died, and then he's saying, like, he's changing his life now. He's not, though. He acknowledges that he's going to forget her and have other people who die in his life and, like, move on from it, and that, like, the further we get into the book, the further that he acknowledges and accepts this idea that he doesn't know who she was, and she's still just dead, which is such a crazy concept. So I don't understand that critique of the book, like I said, unless people are literally just not reading it through its entirety. And then also, like I said earlier, calling it cringy or calling it whatever without the acknowledgement of when it was written, like the time in which it was written and how unique that the concept was at the time. I don't know. It's just such a good book, dude. I'm so emotional over the book. I don't know. I don't know if she did it on purpose or not. I know that's kind of the whole point of the book, right? Is like you're left to wonder if she did. I would like to think that it was just a freak accident. I don't know. Comment down below. Let me know what you thought of the book. If you read it before, or if this was like your first time hearing it or whatever, I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Yeah. I think that's all I have to say. Like I said, this is a bonus episode, so I'll have the regularly scheduled Friday uploads. Just make sure you vote in my polls. I post on Saturdays to pick out what I review next. My videos are all on Spotify now if you want to watch them there, if that's easier for you. And I got memberships if you want some extra bonus content. I'm working on that right now. Working on a schedule. I think that's all I have, man. Like I said, I appreciate you guys so much. I appreciate that I have somewhere to talk about all these feelings. I don't mind crying on camera. I think it's therapeutic having somewhere to vent about this stuff. So I appreciate you guys listening to me yap. And with that, happy 2025. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.